And then I am going to say, welcome to the July 2024 FMDiSC meeting. I think we have a good meeting. We have with us Colleen Hammersley, Josh Ormond, and Rick Kalman. Chris Moyer's Roundup feature will return next month. And during presentations, we'd like to ask you to mute your microphones. After Josh's presentation, we'll be into breakout rooms, and when we come back, there'll be news and announcements if anyone has any. Just message me if you have an announcement. So, Colleen, are you ready?
I am ready. I am ready. It's so wonderful to see so many friendly faces in the room.
Yeah. Okay. So for people who don't live in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan, this is how we say where we live. I grew up here. Colleen, why don't you show people where you live?
I'm up here on the little pinky. Right.
And that is genuinely how we do it.
It is. It is. And when I lived in the UP, I had to add the UP.
I asked my husband the other day, you think people in Italy, pick up their foot and point? For those of us who don't live in anatomically correct geographical features. So let's talk about you. Let's talk about basic information. We got where you live. Tell us about your family, your boating, whatever's going on basically with you.
Sure. So I have two kids. They're both in their 30s now, and they're busy and out doing things. One, the fun thing about one of them is he works in live sound, and he did some work with Dave Matthews Band. And when he was there, they said, Hammersley, do you know Colleen Hammersley? And he was like, well, yeah, it's my mom. Like, oh, really? And I thought, well, that's cool. I get to be the cool one there. So because they use FileMaker, they knew me. So that was funny. He got a kick out of that. And then my youngest son is just moved from Ogden, Oregon, just outside of Salt Lake, up to Vermont with his significant other. So I'm looking forward to being able to explore that area too.
Oh, it's a beautiful part of the country. You'll love it.
Yeah, I've never been out there, so looking forward to it.
Oh, absolutely. The whole New England thing is fun.
Yeah.
So tell us what your consulting business looks like currently, about size, customers, what you're doing with yourself.
So, I don't know how many years ago now, several years ago, the consulting business always ended up having large clients, a few small clients, of course, to start and so forth. But then I quickly kind of fell into large projects that used to last a long time, 10, 15 years, and they would go on, which was wonderful in some respects. But then I started thinking I had a client that migrated away from the system, and another client was a division of the National Institutes of Health. And there was a federal mandate to stop having siloed systems, and for everyone that does that type of it managed intellectual property agreements, and anyone who does that needed to be on the same system. So I knew that they would be migrating off at some point, and I'm thinking, well, I can churn the marketing wheel again and start up and find another client. But I started looking at the clock and my hair color and thought, how am I ever going to retire and feel good about it if I take on yet another client that lasts a long time? So at that point, I started working for subcontracting out and working for some other people. I worked for the Proof Group for a while and then settled with Kiza. But I still have I do still have DataWaves consulting simply because the clients that I have, it's either that I still do have federal contract and that's with me. And then I have a couple that are, their charter indicates that they must use a minority or woman-owned small business. So I qualify
You're
for
it.
that. Well,
That's
there are a
cool.
few. There are a few, right? I know, unfortunately, when Susan Prosser got ill, she reached out and, or not, sorry, not Susan Prosser. Susan McMillan Tucker got ill. She reached out and said, you know, again, these were clients that were with her because she was a woman-owned business and transitioned a few there. So anyway, so it's a mix right now. 4 days a week, I'm working with Kiza, and then Fridays are my other clients and so forth. So that's how it pans out.
You're working in what seems to some of us to be a relatively remote area. Are almost all your clients remote, or?
Yes, I had one client about 15 years ago that was local, but that was kind of just lucky that they were lucky. Everyone else has been remote. Um, my first client that I worked on remotely, it was via Timbuktu with dial-up.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of us remember
Yeah,
that.
yeah. More
So,
on-site visits and travel then too, though. So that was an advantage. Got to the city, Bob. That was my excuse.
yeah. Yeah, I know. I have a client in Orlando and I wish I could go there and sit with their users. Now that we're deploying, it's difficult to do it remotely. So,
Yeah, there's always value to that. I find it amazing that people don't necessarily value actually sitting with the user. There's
I do.
nothing that compares.
Okay, let's talk about your journey to FileMaker. Where did you start? Um,
Sure. Literally fell into FileMaker when my youngest um, went to preschool. I had a desire to get out of the house. I'd been
but
around
you
kids.
had a degree, right?
Yes, I have a degree in business and economics, business administration and economics. And previously, I had worked for a financial and investment firm in Suttons Bay. So I could, but it was hard to get back into that part-time. And when I looked around Traverse City and Suttons Bay, the part-time availability so that I could be with my kids when they needed was basically waitressing and so forth. And I did some of that for a bit. But then there was an advertisement for a company which was an extension of a collection company that was located down in Lansing, Michigan, which is much larger. And they wanted someone just 1 day a week. So I thought, well, perfect. Doesn't really matter what the work is. How bad can it be? So I took that job, and that was right in Suttons Bay. So it was very handy. And when I took that job, my task was to answer phones, but there were only 6 people in the office and no one really called our office. And any transfers from the Lansing office, they knew their extension. So it was very boring. So they immediately put me to work. They handed me a bunch of printouts that it turned out came out of a FileMaker system they had created. And they had me transpose those printouts, rekey them into Excel to produce an invoice. It got boring very quickly. So I said, why are we doing this way? And they explained that the person who had developed the FileMaker system just never got around to what we would call the invoicing module. But they did have, there was a FileMaker 2.1 manual sitting there on the desk. So that was the first manual I've ever read, literally cover to cover. I didn't, while I was answering phones and waiting for things to happen, I read the manual. And then when it came down to, okay, how can I produce these invoices in a better fashion? I had something to start with. So that was my first experience with FileMaker. And I got to know it pretty well because I had the opportunity to really learn. And remember back in the day, I keep telling people there wasn't as much to learn when you were learning
It
FileMaker.
was a lot simpler. Did you have database experience before that?
I did have some database experience. So one of my internships in college, I worked for a restaurant, again doing invoicing. It was down in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and Dow Chemical has their headquarters there. And their salespeople used to, it was a high-end restaurant. Their salespeople used to entertain and go to the restaurant. So they had accounts, and then they would have to, on a weekly, monthly, I can't remember how often the basis, they would submit, they would track the sales account balances for the salespeople and submit them to Dow. And so during my internship, they asked me to help them come up with a system. And I wrote, that was my introduction to databases, and that was in Lotus Symphony. So I created a system that allowed them to the end of day process to include all of the charge slips, and they entered it in so that they could then be invoiced.
I always find it so interesting where every direction people have come into FileMaker. You know, I came from printing and Dave came from music, and that's really amazing. Nobody studies FileMaker in college. So you had a good first impression on the vintage FileMaker, as we like to call it.
Yes. Yeah.
So I have here a note. You said you got the best business advice from your dad. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. When I decided to go into business for myself after the kids were in school full time, he said, if there is a professional organization of any kind, join it and participate. And so that's how I met several people in the room. Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Knight was at my first developers conference. I participated in the, Claris Talk back then, I think it was. I can't remember.
Tech Talk.
Tech Talk, yes, Tech Talk. And then I think it was, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, or Stephen, it was the second developers conference. Was it called developers conference then? And that was in fact the most valuable. Becoming a part of this group and being able to share information, talk to people, and so forth has been ideal. Couldn't have gotten where I am today without it.
Okay. All right. Next. Well, okay. Let's talk more about the development of your career and how you managed to get into those large projects, because a lot of us, we start small.
Right. So my first large project, again, it was luck. My sister lived in Chicago and she was working as a secretary at McKinsey, and she was offered a promotion, and that promotion just included the fact that she had to know FileMaker. And she was excited, and she called me up and she said, "You know FileMaker, right? That's what you use." I said, "Yep, that's what I just read the manual on."
FileMaker by association. I love it.
Exactly. So she took the job, and she would just call me up and say, "How do I do this? How do I make it do this?" She had inherited a solution that managed back in the day their marketing publication, which is the McKinsey Quarterly. It's all online and so forth now, but they used to send out physical books to their clients, and they tracked who was getting it and any response they got back. Typical marketing strategy there. And so about after she'd had that position for, maybe 9 months, a year, her boss came in and said, "This is kind of silly. Why don't we just hire your sister as a consultant to help us get this where we need it to go?" So then that's when I had the opportunity to work with them. And with that under your belt, it just made some of the bigger stuff come by. and it expanded the experience of what we used with FileMaker. They ended up actually using the SDK and sending out the app on a CD to their global offices. They would use it, and then they would export the data and send it back to us, and we would report on it.
I'm just watching.
So, yeah, so it was fun. But it seems like I haven't done a ton of marketing. It's simply been low networking, knowing people, getting into things, has always been how my jobs have come to me.
Mhm. Do you belong to other professional organizations?
I do not. No,
So that's interesting.
I try to participate in some of the ones locally, but it's been hit and miss over the years. It's been, a group of people have been well organized, and we'd get together, and then it would fall off completely. And then, so small towns. If the key organizer disappears, the organization disappears.
So Colleen, you're saying this is sort of the high watermark for professional organizations that you belong
Yeah,
to.
it
Wow,
is.
well, that's quite sad.
We do okay.
You do great.
So, yeah. All right, let's talk about, you said you worked with major clients, including the National Institutes of Health. I heard rumors they had a huge number of seats installed. Did you work with all of those, some of those?
No, I did not work with all of those. They do have a huge number of seats, and it's available, I think, to anyone within the NIH, which makes it the largest client, I believe. But each institute or division, or they go down 6 levels deep, has their own governance. And so the group that I worked with was the technology transfer branch, and they used FileMaker to manage intellectual property agreements. And because they were a center that outsourced their services to other centers, they're the largest manager of intellectual property contracts within the National Institutes of Health. So because they managed so many, it was quite interesting, because we had a very broad spectrum of different types of agreements, and we covered all of the processes, and we also extended into then the other licensing systems, and as different types of property agreements advanced, they would go into other external systems to be managed and so forth. So we integrated with some of those, which was nice exposure to see what they were using, how they were using it, that kind of thing. And while I was working with them, I had the opportunity to meet at DevCon and so forth, other developers working with FileMaker in the government. And I'm not sure if there still is, probably there still is, a government users group in DC. And so I attended several of those meetings, presented at one of those meetings, and got a few clients, referral business and so forth. So I worked with some of the other institutes, but the big long-term project has been with the Technology Transfer Center.
Mm-hmm.
But it's quite interesting to see what they do with it. There's a lot of they've got some fantastic solutions out there.
Yeah, I did a small department of Cal State here locally. They had an NIH grant to support underserved populations who want to go into the nursing and medical and healthcare fields. So they had to administer that program, and apparently a lot of the other grantees were having problems meeting their reporting requirements, but with the FileMaker, we managed to do it. So
that was the key, right? Because they cannot over time know what Congress is going to ask of them. So
right.
you have to be very nimble in your way. And that was working with NIH. When I first started working with NIH, it was literally a server, FileMaker server under someone's desk, right? And as their security policies changed, that changed. And we moved into having IT manage the servers and so forth. And that's how I made the transition, or had to learn how to talk an Oracle developer through updating a system. That was the impetus for separation. How can I make that process easier? That was painful.
Oh, we'll talk about that pain. That's a great segue into your association with the separation model.
Well, it started with the word database, right? Because from an Oracle perspective, it's just different. So I was, and the way the government system works is every contract cycle, whoever got the best bid would be assigned to manage the server. So you weren't working with the same people over time. It's not like in a private client, you might get to know the IT director and you come to terms with how you're going to work together and fit into their rules and infrastructure and so forth, and they understand what you're doing. It was constantly relearning and relearning. So in order to make it as simple as possible, that's when the desire to, fully separate the data from everything else so that we could modify reporting functionality, all of that, the business logic, without having to ask someone or write a script and let it run and have them manage it. And because I was not allowed on the server at all. It was a
Right.
complete no touch situation.
So it's just one file is way easier than do all these imports and
right. And when we went to that, it was also required that we develop on the dev tier. Testing took place on the staging tier, and then it got promoted to production. And so in order to meet those requirements, right, I could easily say, copy everything to the staging tier, take this one file and put it. I did cheat though. When I was creating new fields, I would go into production at night and create new fields. Yep. And then just leave them there and have them brought back later and then use them.
Yeah. So yeah, the dealing with IT's changing not only requirements, but personnel, because in government entities or universities, it's always someone new being promoted or moved or whatever. So, and you think, how many times have I explained this?
Right. And some people get it right away or were open to it, and others just wanted you to literally write the instructions down and then hopefully they would follow them correctly. Yep.
Or not.
Exactly.
Okay, so tell us about some of the biggest learning experiences that you got out of all this.
Lots and lots of learning experiences. My first, I think I had mentioned in the email, I realized the importance of some of the settings in ScriptMaker when I came in one evening at this collection agency, and there was a young girl who was working on the system. She was just, I think, in college. This was a night job, and she was supposed to just make dunning phone calls, just leave messages to people. And so she got bored. And when she hit, go to the next record. So the idea was the system was programmed to pull up the next record to make the phone call, the next record to make the phone call. And depending on the level of phone call, this was when we, of course, used every color FileMaker would allow us to use, right, for our layouts. And depending on the level, the colors would change. You might have a yellow background for one, an orange for one, and a red for another as you produced along it. That was not a system I designed, but I noticed that kind of was how it worked. And she said, come on over here, look what I can make the screen do. If I hit the next button and then hit escape, 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 escape really fast, I get different colors. I've never gotten those different colors before. Isn't this great? Which of course meant she was logging the information to the wrong set of fields. She was getting a hold of people. I mean, it was nightmarish. But it did explain some of those billing anomalies we had where it was like, wait a minute, how is it possible? You said you made 30 phone calls, but you were only supposed to make 15 in that section. But it's user experience is important. Being able to see and hear how your users do it is important. And another big system I deployed, this one was in Traverse City. This was my larger client in Traverse City. And we moved them from paper to FileMaker. And they did wide format printing. And when I got there, they had what they considered their golden folders, that contained all the information of the job, the proofs of the artwork, all of the contact
And they
information.
would move it from system to desk from desk to desk, yes.
Yep, and that's how it
Sneakernet.
worked. Exactly. And there was a woman who was in charge. That was her role in life. She moved the folders around and kept track of whose folder was on what desk, so that when they called and said, what's the status of my job, she'd know where it was. And so we developed a system and deployed it, and we were testing it. The idea I had to explain was that we test this. We make sure it does the things you want and so forth. And so I'm going to leave you and we're going to test this for a couple of weeks and then I'll be back. And I came back and I came in and the boss met me at the door and he said, I can't tell you how happy we are with the system. It's fabulous. We fired that woman and we're live. And I'm thinking, we have no backups. We have no, I mean, it was just, so we've learned a lesson there about, okay, let's make sure we understand what testing means and what testing does. But that was,
mention, yeah, having somebody fired.
right?
I mean, yeah, we always tell it to our clients is we don't want to reduce your staff. We want to expand your business, and have them focus on more useful, dynamic tasks rather than the rote work. And I don't think I've ever gotten anyone fired.
Well, it wasn't my intent, but evidently they were happy to, but they had stopped using the folders, right? So
right,
it's like,
right.
Wait a minute, where's the data verification? Where can we ensure? But no, they were very, very happy with it. Very happy with it.
Enthusiastic adoption. That's great.
Yes. Although interestingly, that was the same client that I had said, what are we going to call it? What are we going to call the system? It's not FileMaker. FileMaker is the platform. What are we going to call the solution? And they couldn't come up with a name and they couldn't be bothered. And then they had been running that system probably at that point for maybe 6 months. And I went down to the production floor and talked to one of the print line managers. He'd always been really helpful. And I said, hi, how you doing? He said, oh, great. It's so good to see you. So good to see you. Wanted to let you know we have a name for the system. I said, you do? Fabulous. All these creative people, what's your name? It's Lois. Lack of information system. And I went, he said, yeah, remember when you were meeting with sales and they told you none of this is required, sometimes, but you can't force us to enter that information. You can't make us put it in because I don't know it then. It'll come later. Don't worry about it.
Sales. Never believe sales.
Exactly. And then it would come to that. Hard stop. Don't have enough information. So yeah. That was another fun one.
No, that's been my learning experience is don't believe what sales says ever. Talk to the end users, the people actually doing the work. So, okay. So tell us about the times you felt the best about the work you do.
I always feel the best about the work I do when people say that it makes their day better, their work day better. It's easier. Um, and I think that's part of the reason I had such a long engagement with NIH is that they really liked using the system. We tried very hard to integrate all of their requests. It included, document management, and at that time, one of the things they loved the most is they had to produce legal documents, right, to send out and get signatures and approvals and that kind of thing. And that's when I had worked with 360 Works. Word had just gone to XML format. And I'm like, I know, shout out to Bev, I know XML can do that. So there should be a way, and I got a hold of them and we got a plugin. And that was like one of their big, oh man, you have no idea how much you save us just producing these templates over and over and over to be able to send them. But it's basically it's always that. It's when it's working and people say, yes, that you've solved the problem that we ask you to solve. That feels the best to me.
Those moments do come, but they're not often. So what keeps you working in between times other than the money, of course?
Love the puzzle. I love learning the new business and understanding what it is that can make someone's day better. And taking that and saying, okay, if this is your pain point, or if your challenge is to be able to, achieve X, how can we structure a system that will get you that, what needs to be involved to make that happen, and seeing that through fruition. That, to me, that's the joy of the job. That's what I love doing, is seeing that happen.
Did you have any background in like graphic design or user interface design? And if not, how did you educate yourself in that?
No, I did not have any background. And it was, again, a colleague that I met at DevCon that took one look at one of the solutions I did early on and said, why are you not padding your fields? Why are you not doing this? Why are you making those choices? And then I realized, ooh, this is bad. And that's when I learned to copy people like Bob Shockey, that you go on and you look at all their demo files that they put out there for you, and you just study them and you think, why does that work? How does it not work? And Bob was also kind enough to talk to me about color and why it's important and how. So I've tried to educate myself and come up to speed. And now there are so many more resources than there were when we started.
That's
and
true.
that's really helpful, right? Understanding what the guidelines are and just reading some of the technical documentation as to why it matters, right?
Right. Yeah, I hear you, because I had to educate myself too, and I use those same resources, Bob Shockey, among others.
Yeah, many others.
So you kind of glancingly mentioned the separation model. You had kind of a major role in developing that and bringing it to the community. Can we talk about that a little?
Sure. Yeah, well, I think, as I said, it was at a conference when I was talking to Stephen Gallagher about the status of the job and how I was doing with NIH and so forth. I think it was more of a, how's that relationship going kind of a thing. And I mentioned the challenge. And he was the first one who put the seed in my head and said, you need to find a way, to separate that. And I thought, can you? Is it possible? And he said, well, I haven't seen it done yet, but I think you should look at that. So I started playing with it and trying to get there. And then the next year I was talking to Wendy King, and she was attempting to do the same thing. She was working on a system that she was hoping, it was for one specific government type client, but she was hoping that there was a market for it afterwards. But in order to do that, it needed to be upgradable, right? And so she was looking at the separation model and trying different things there. So we came together and talked about what was working, what wasn't, what the challenges were, and we would trade ideas back and forth as we kind of decided what we thought was the best methodology and what the gotchas were, what you had to, rethink.
Do you recall what version of FileMaker that was?
That was pre-7. So that was FileMaker 6, 5 or 6. One of the two.
Okay.
Yep. So everything was one hop away.
Yep.
Lots of globals to make things happen. And record locking in portals, absolutely a painful point. So there were, just as I say, it was try this methodology versus that methodology, what works. But we did both quickly agree that once you had wrapped your head around how it worked, if you needed to solve that type of problem that we had to solve, which was an easy upgrade path, upgrading was a joy. I mean, remember back in the day, upgrading was very painful.
Oh,
and
separate files.
yeah. So just being able to tell someone to replace this one file on the server was huge, just for us from quality of life. That made things much better. So that was the beginning of it, and then it came down to when the data model changed underneath. Where does it fit in? Does it still fit in, and how does it fit in, and so forth? And I still feel strongly that there's a strong place for it. It's certainly not in every solution, right? There are many solutions that don't require separation and don't need it and don't benefit greatly from it, but many that do. And I know, it was Danny Mac and I used to talk about it because they had the accounting solution and they were attempting to, lock up their business logic around how that worked and so forth. And again, sell it as a product. So we talked about it a lot. It's how you could put the logic in one file, this business process is proprietary, that kind of thing. And I've just had so many opportunities to say, yep, okay, slice that off. That functionality is going to be a little WebDirect file just for these people. They just need access to this. And it makes it a lot easier. So I think it's been a fun road. It has its detractors. I'll say that. I have learned.
How has it evolved in your projects? I mean, are you still using it most of the time or some of the time?
It depends on the project, but most of the time, unless it's a smaller, simple app, that will be one file. But most of the time I'm still using it.
Okay. So what version of FileMaker are you using currently? Are you all the way up to 2024 or whatever?
I have 4 versions of FileMaker currently in my dock, depending on who I'm working, what solution I'm working on and where it needs to be tested.
Okay, what's the oldest version a client is using?
I think 18.
Okay.
Yep. Thankfully have not had to go back to anything earlier than that yet. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it stays that way.
I have one in 16 and I'm developing mostly in 19 and I'm going, no, I can't use that. I got to get them to upgrade.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It's frustrating. And I have one client that I'm still working on. I inherited this solution that the layouts are still from the converted classic mode. Oh, is that painful? It's just, but it's a nonprofit.
The themes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yuck.
It's nightmarish.
Time to suggest a complete rebuild.
Oh, it's been suggested. They just don't have the cash for that yet.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Oh, I don't think there's anything specifically that I can recall right now. Just again, a shout out to many, many, many faces in this group that I'm seeing pop on that have helped me over the years. I have always appreciated that so much.
Well, are there questions? We're opening up for questions here. Anyone? Oh, okay. Tim?
Yeah, hi, Colleen. I remember your presentation. I'm trying to remember which of the many DevCons I was at. It wasn't, I don't think it was Phoenix. It may have been, what was the first DevCon you made the presentation about the separation model at?
Orlando.
Yes, it
Orlando.
was.
That was it. I remember that. And it was revelatory to me, and I've been using it ever since and still use it. I, for a long time, specialized in solutions for film festivals, all of which are nonprofit organizations. And I had a whole bunch of different modules. So I used pairs of a data file and an interface file, depending on which modules a particular client was using. And I think I'm probably one of the few FileMaker developers that ever did a complete ticketing system with thermal ticket printers in FileMaker. And it was a bit of a challenge, but it was fun doing it. I don't attempt to compete in that market anymore. When I started doing ticketing, there was only Ticketmaster, so there was no competition. But it's been a wonderful development style for me, and it's really worked. And plus I've combined that with single file interfaces, globals, creating records using globals, and the whole shebang. But thank you for that revelatory talk in Orlando. That I've been using it ever since.
Well, good. I'm really glad it helped you. It was, like I say, it was fun to be doing that and then to have the opportunity to share it, because it was kind of a new idea at the time, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of FileMaker, is the amount of sharing that goes on in the community. And
Absolutely.
And it changed my life. I was sent a copy of FileMaker with a small nonprofit I was working with. I was doing a little bit of consulting work in Microsoft Access at the time. And I asked for a copy of Access, and instead this little toy database thing called FileMaker 2 for Windows arrived. And I thought, well, this will work for a while until a real database comes along. And then now, of course, I wouldn't touch Access with a 10-foot pole, but that's led to a whole career. But I think most of us have stories like that of how we got into FileMaker, and that's part of the fascination of being in the community, I think. But anyway, thank you for your your history of your own path coming to FileMaker. I always find those stories fascinating. So thanks again.
Dave, did you have a comment or?
Yeah, I just, first and foremost, Colleen, I think I've heard this before, but DevCon 1 in '96, I came as just a wet-mouthed little know-nothing, and met this woman who was like me, just scared as a mouse of all the geniuses in the audience, and it was Wendy, and we sat next to each other the entire conference and just went everywhere. And so we became, really good friends and still keep in touch a bit. The thing that strikes me is how I've been reading some books recently about how burdens become accelerants of excellence, right? In some respect, you're sitting here up in this crazy part of the country. You don't have T3 lines back in the day. You don't have fast access to all this. You're not going to go relocate your family to downtown Washington, D.C. and so forth. And so it was sort of, necessity was the mother of invention here. And I think a lot of other people were dabbling with some of this stuff, but you were the one that you and Wendy came in and really codified it all. You really kind of put all the guardrails around it and how this works, and gave thought to the process. And I think some advisor articles, right? And things of that nature. So it strikes me that, oh my God, there's this huge barrier in front of me doing the work that I want in the environment that I want, and I'm going to figure this stuff out. And you did, and you brought the community along with you. So kudos.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun.
Stephen, I think you'll have the last question.
Okay, it's been since having first met Colleen at DevCon #2 in San Jose, and I don't think it was even called DevCon then. It's been very gratifying to see the impact that she has had on the FileMaker community, both in terms of technical matters and in terms of leadership. And plus, it was fun trundling you around all over San Jose. That was a good conference, and I saw Barb on here a minute ago, and I believe she was there too. And so this is good. But thank you for your many contributions. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being an inspiration to all of us and showing us that you can succeed even in times of adversity.
Well, thanks, Stephen. And I did appreciate, I showed up at that DevCon without a car and in a hotel down the street. So Stephen was kind enough to shuttle me around, and then I learned always stay on property.
We all have memories of kindness, of strangers becoming friends at DevCon. So I want to thank you so much for the time you spent with me. I've treasured coming to get to know you better, and I think we all have enjoyed this. So thank you, Colleen.
Thank you, Lynn. Appreciate it.
So we're going to move directly into Josh Ormond, and you should be able to share your screen. And nice picture. All right, there we go. Josh Ormond of IOZax. I regret putting the other stuff in the announcement. I was not aware. And so here we are.
It was all good. I'm sure most of you know at least who I am or have heard of me. My name is Josh Ormond. I won't bore you with the whole long story about where I come from. We can talk about that later if you want. But my name is Josh Ormond. Officially, I work. I have my own business called IOZax Designs. I know the name probably has questions like, how did you come up with that? And we can talk about that later. I also do a lot of work for CityTech Solutions. So appreciate the work that I get to do with them. It's a great team that I get to work with and some fun work. So anyways, that's about who I am. Just a couple reminders as you listen to this. This is really about opinions. So if you're squeamish about other people's opinions, there's a leave button down in the bottom right. So be prepared. You're going to be exposed to some stuff that'll probably make you feel sick for a couple days, some gross code. This is a family show, so I will not talk about controversial subjects like spaces versus tabs or the placement of your semicolon. So we'll stay away from that stuff. If you disagree with any of the opinions that I have, that's completely okay. I expect it. And, this can be an open discussion. We can talk about it. Don't be shy about speaking up or asking questions about maybe something I'm showing or talking about. But I think overall, this is a fairly basic topic, but I think it's important sometimes that we kind of roll back and see, like, why are we doing what we're doing? And is it the best way or the easiest way long-term to name things and word things and how we write code? So that's essentially what we'll be talking about. So as I started looking into this idea of expressiveness, the general idea is that being expressive is effectively conveying thought or feeling or conveying a specified idea or quality. Now, there are a lot of different ways that humans express themselves, right? Like we have facial expressions, vocal modulation, text communication. We all have that friend that sends everything in all caps. We always think they're yelling at us. Even proximity is a way that we express ourselves. One of my very close friends, one of the phrases he says regularly, which always cracks me up, is my sufficiency has been sophisticated, and to have any more would be superfluous. Now, language is an interesting thing. We can make things more succinct, and still convey the same ideas. We may lose some of the detail or the nuance as you simplify the words, but if you carefully choose the word, you can convey the same meaning, right? As we look at this phrase, do we generally know what it means?
I do,
When we
because
make
my
this-
mom used to say it.
Yeah, there's definitely groups of people and generations and areas that are very familiar with this phrase. If you don't know what it means, we'll keep talking and you'll understand. When we make decisions as humans, it's really to decide which parts of our language are not needed in order to convey our intent or our idea. The message gets conveyed and received, which is really the important part of human communication. So being concise, just saying only what we need to, and clear often requires just choosing the right words. And very often those words need to be chosen based on our target audience, who we're talking to. Here's another version of that. I have had an elegant sufficiency. Now, this is slightly less complex language, but when you're sitting in front of an empty plate, it pretty much conveys the meaning. Like, I'm not going to eat anymore. But for the rest of us, how would we normally say this? Yeah, thank you, I'm full. This conveys both the appreciation we want to express and the intention for us to stop eating and not have any more. Now, obviously, this is a really silly example, but the point here is that we can take complex ideas and boil them down and make specific choices in our communication, what we're going to talk about it as in code. But it's easy to shrink them down into something that's simple and clear and conveys the meaning that we originally intended when we wrote the code, so that others can understand it, others also including our future self. Now, we're going to mention this really briefly, but we won't talk about it too much going forward, but it's a good idea to keep in mind when we're talking about expressiveness. There are kind of two variations of programming, imperative and declarative. Imperative is you tell the system or the program or the application exactly how it's supposed to do something. You provide those step-by-step instructions. For any parent that has children or someone that has a male significant other, you know imperative programming. You have to give them every step that you want them to do. Then you have declarative programming, whereas you're going to describe to the program the outcome that you want back, what you want to get back, versus telling it how to do it. Now, we see a lot of this declarative programming coming up with all of the AI stuff. We're basically handing a set of instructions like, this is what we want back, but we don't really care how the AI actually pulls it off. We just want the outcome, the response. So as I was doing more research, I was looking for what is really the definition of expressiveness in code. And this is really what I found. Like the conversations were widely varied, some of them very aggressive, but there's really no formal definition. Now, the benefit for us is we get to make it up. This is the definition that we're going to focus on today. I think this is a really good one. Expressiveness in a programming language is about the capability of a programming language to express the solution of a problem in the closest way to the original problem, in a clear, natural, intuitive, and concise way, and in terms of other solved problems. This is that same idea, just with a different format and font because I thought it looked nice. We're going to focus mainly on the first two things, but first let's talk about how we express a solution to a problem as close to the original problem as possible. Now, when we talk about this, really what we're looking for is a connection between the reason why you're using something versus how it's actually written, so that some other person or yourself knows to use this solution. All right, so as close to the original problem as possible. Now, we've all seen this calculation. We're familiar with it. We know how it works. We're going to just get back that text in the blue box. How many of you have a function that looks something like this? You would need to extract either just the table name or just the field name. Again, I think every person on this call has a function like this in their library. You may have even gone so far as to handle the quoting part of it because you're using it for something that requires it to be quoted. What about this one? How many of you have one of these in your custom function library? Probably many of you do. We have a general idea, like we're doing something with SQL and we're going to use this in our calls to help simplify making the calls. We don't have to write out all of the code every time. We kind of encapsulate it in this custom function. How many of you have both of these custom functions? Show of hands. How many have both of these custom functions in their library? And I will wait till you respond. Okay, so we have 2 people that responded and the rest of you are liars. That's what I've learned. Or you're sleeping. But when we look at this function, this is really what we're trying to figure out is when is the right time to use either one of these functions. They are more expressive in that they tell us there's a specific piece of functionality that this code is going to do. So a simple example, we probably see this somewhere in our code. We're grabbing the variable, we're grabbing the table name, we're grabbing the field name. I'm not advocating for broad use of set field by name here. This is just an example that fit nicely on the screen. But this gives us the general idea of how it works. When you look at this, all of us can read this and know exactly what it's doing without actually seeing those 2 functions. We have a general idea of what they already do, and we can move on fairly quickly. So this is a good use and expressive use of these functions. What about if we were to have something like this? Now, see, we've made the poor woman sick. This is kind of gross to look at. I mean, does it make any sense? The functionality may work exactly the same, but when you read that, you look at, all right, I'm setting a name, and why is SQL involved here? Like, there's a lot of other cognitive load that's happening as you're reading this code, trying to wonder, like, why are we using this function? Why not something else? When somebody doesn't know what code does or why it's being used, this is where things start to break. You miss bugs that may exist because you're kind of distracted by the other code that's in the way. So our first rule of expressiveness is really make sure that you express the solution to the problem as close to the problem space as possible. Now, for a lot of times for us, that means choosing the right words so that there's a direct connection between the problem and the solution that we're using. Okay, another example, talking about loops. Loops are such a common thing in what we do in development. We've probably all seen this pattern. We have a list of contacts, we're going to loop through them and do something with them where we grab each value and then set it to a field. This is very common, very easy, nothing wrong with it. It works just fine. But if you ask yourself the question, could it be slightly easier? How many of you are familiar with this calculation? Now, if you work with other programming languages like JavaScript or Python or Rust, or you're very familiar with this type of construct. This handles a lot of the looping code for you. So it's going to handle the iteration of the iterator. It's going to check and see if we've reached the end of our list. And then when it's all done, it's going to clear that variable so you can reuse it again later if needed. And then it's going to exit the loop. This is fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this. And I would say that it's a good idea to be familiar with this and know how it works. So when you see it, you recognize what it's doing right away. However, I would also say for general use, it's not necessary to write this out every time. So if you were to see this in a loop, it would look something like this. Now you notice the last loop had 5 steps in it. This one has 4, so it's doing a few things for us that it's handling. So we're encapsulating all that code into one place. Now you'll notice in this variable or in this loop, I'm getting the current value and I'm placing it in that i.value variable. A lot of times I'll do this purely for visibility. I know exactly what it's doing, I know where it is, and I can set it and know exactly that this variable is being used somewhere. So it's just clear. But what if we could make this easier? Like again, we go back to our custom functions. This is where maybe we could make this easier. Now, how many of you are familiar with what impure functions are? Impure functions are functions that have side effects, like setting variables or changing the state of something in the code when maybe it's not explicitly expressed. There's just a little bit of magic in them that may not always be obvious. If you are offended by impure functions, you should leave now, because we're about to go off the rails.
Robert has a question.
Hey, go ahead, Robert.
I'm sorry, I was just reacting to some of your questions and things. So show of hand type of thing. Sorry.
Thank you. No, it's good.
Okay, thanks.
Appreciate it. All right, so this for each function, I think this one in particular came from Fabrice Norman. It does exactly the same thing that this calculation does. It just encapsulates it in an easy to call custom function. All we have to do is use the function, we hand it the list, and we tell it what the iterator is, and it handles iterating the variable, the I variable. It handles pulling out the I value in each loop. It handles checking to make sure to know when we're at the end of a list, and it handles clearing that variable all at once. So again, we've gone from 5 steps to 3 steps, and this is still very, very easy to read and to see. That's the idea of expressiveness. So can we encapsulate and make things simpler and make them more expressive? So we may have, the other part of expressiveness sometimes is we may have multiple versions of this for each custom function. Like we have this for each that handles maybe JSON. We have one that maybe handles an array, or maybe we have one that handles a list, or we might even have a for each that we just want to run a specified number of times, and we actually just tell it how many times we want it to run. So that's another option. The nice part about this is it kind of reads like a sentence. For each value in the list, do this thing. And that is one of the benefits to, again, associating the problem and the solution close together, because it's so easy to understand and read. It may only take a person one exposure to this custom function and using it once to be able to use it for the rest of their development career. Again, that's the benefit of having the problem space and the solution space so close together. The next aspect of expressiveness that's important is expressing the solution to the problem in a clear, natural, intuitive, and concise way. So just to really talk about those words, clear means we're avoiding language complexity wherever possible. We're using words that are simple and that most people know. Natural, obviously, it fits well with general human cognitive processes. Intuitive means it's understood without excessive explanation. So it really shouldn't take much explanation to explain the solution to the problem. And concise just means short, well-chosen names. Now, again, going back to that idea of imperative versus declarative, because FileMaker very much leans to the imperative side of programming, this is where our naming becomes important, because that's what we're going to read most of the time. So having good, clear, concise names that are natural and clear really allows us to express what our original intention was when we wrote the code, without having to say to every senior developer or junior developer or new developer exactly what it's doing. So what are some areas where we could be more expressive? There are error, and error trapping is a big area. Because it's such a complex space, having a way to do it is very important. And again, having very clear, natural, and intuitive ways to write the code makes it easier for people to adopt it. Because adoption is really what helps us to make sure that maintainability is achieved long-term. The code works, it's less bug-free, it's easier to spot bugs when they happen, they stand out a little bit more. All of those things help. Handling script triggers, that's an area that we can be expressive, because it's code that we may be flipping triggers on and off constantly as we're running scripts to make sure things do and don't happen. So it's important to be expressive there. Handling script parameters and results, because it's something that we do in almost every script we run. Having an expressive way to handle script parameter and script results can really beneficial and help speed up code and reduce bugs. Another one, testing for correct window modes. I mean, you've seen the list. We'll show it in a minute, but you've seen the list of like get window mode. What do all of those numbers mean? Do you remember all of them? If you were given a test, would you pass? It's important to know as a developer, that's what makes us a better developer, but in general use, do we have to always use those numbers, or can we make it easier? We'll talk about that in a minute. And then obviously custom functions, scripts, and scription functions help us to be clear, natural, intuitive, and concise. One of the things that I have seen a lot lately is single character variables. So A, B, C, D, whether it's in functions or scripts, try to avoid that. It creates a lot of ambiguity that it really sometimes is really hard to figure out. You have to look back and forth in calculation to figure out what this letter means and what that letter means, instead of just writing the words out. Especially if you're working with junior developers, that becomes very difficult for people to follow when they're already focused on so many other new things to them.
I tend to use short variables, single letter, just a few letters in local variables, but not for global variables, just to maintain clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, abbreviating something that everybody is familiar with is super easy. Like even the use of the letter I for an iterator is that's when you're in programming, that's just what people do everywhere. It's a law that has been formed. But you know, other things like if you were referencing employees and you shorten it to EMP, usually that's pretty obvious to most people. So you know, as long as it's clear and natural and intuitive, I think it works. I don't really have any rules here, and I'm only semi-judgmental. So, all right, hey, David, do you have a question or?
Yeah, just one point. You said something really key, Josh, and you know, I have a lot of colleagues who are advanced level programmers and so forth, and they largely work by themselves. And there's this big shining moment where they pat themselves on the back because they use too little characters in a variable or in any of their coding. They go for as small and concise because I know what it means. And that's a completely different approach than if you have a team of people who need readability and the ability to pass jobs back and forth and so on and so forth. So I concur with you that really important to keep stuff. And even the, you know, 5 years from now, the developer that has the same name as you has to come back and reacclimate to what all of the naming structures meant and so forth. So that readability is really, really key at times with multiple developers touching code.
Yep. And even in the example I gave, as Steve points out in the chat, you know, if you work with electromagnetic pulses, you can't use EMP. Okay, so working with somebody a while ago, we had this really complicated project, and I won't tell you what application it was used in, but we were forced to use it, this spreadsheet application. But going back and forth with it, I was doing accounting at the time, and we were trying to get some budget numbers and things. It was a really long, complicated process, took months. So I was working on this project, and it just like they kept going back and coming back to me and saying, all right, and now we need this, and now we need that. And eventually I renamed the file that I was sending to Travis's complicated project. Now I want you to picture for a second, which one of those three expressions did Travis have on his face when he received that file? Okay. Now it's a little bit hard to know, and this is where we start talking about being clear and intuitive. Without any context, you really don't know which face he had. Now, depending on what you think I meant by the file name, you probably think he had face number 2. What face do you think I had when I sent it? Now, if you know me well enough, it could be 1 or 3, or possibly 2. So you have no idea how either one of us felt about what was going on here. So here are a few truths that we're going to shine some light, and this is why it becomes important when you're naming something to be clear and intuitive. All right, so here are some truths. Never once, before or after, did we ever talk about this file name. Which face did he have? Yeah. Still don't know, do you? Travis and I are still very close friends, and I see him weekly. Which face did he have? Which face did I have? I actually enjoyed working on it, so we kind of get a different idea of what it means when I named the thing Travis's Complicated Project. And eventually, Travis submitted a nomination for an annual award with the company and used that project name, and we talked about it. So which face did we have? It was just an amusing thing. We laughed about it and we moved on. There were no hard feelings at all involved in this project. But you could see if somebody else saw that name, maybe they may not quite understand exactly what my intention was when I sent that file. Here's another one I ran into while I was preparing for this presentation the first time I gave it. Would you like to venture a guess as to what this file was for? I mean, this really helps us to appreciate that we need to avoid ambiguity, and we need to be clear and intuitive and natural. Any ideas what this file might be for?
Finding medical help.
It's a good one. I've not heard that one yet. All right, I won't keep you in suspense. So this is DR stands, it was the initials of the sales rep. Her first name was Denise. The last name began with an R. Finder was actually, I worked for a company called Apartment Finder. They printed many different publications, and our office handled several Apartment Finder publications across multiple cities. And Bob, I mean, what about Bob? Well, Bob stands for Book of Business. So that's really all this file was. It wasn't a murder mystery. It wasn't a pitch for some new game show. It wasn't completely somebody's name, and wasn't anything else. It was just that. But I thought it was hilarious when I read this. I thought to myself, if anybody else ever had to go find that file, they wouldn't have found it because it wasn't clear and it wasn't intuitive as to what that file name meant. So I thought that fit in really nicely with what we're talking about. So expressing the solution to the problem in a clear, natural, intuitive, and concise way. How many of you have a function like this in your custom function library? I'd say many of us do. There's something odd about hide object when that can break your brain. Like you're doing the opposite of a thing that you really want to do. And that sometimes makes the logic a little bit hard to understand. So here's a couple examples, and I want to thank Robert No and Daniel Wood for this example, because when I was trying to come up with this example, I was trying to think of one that was sometimes would break our brain trying to understand, will this work or not? And I want you to answer this question. All right, we have an object on the screen, and we have two users. We have Josh and Robert, and our goal is to show this object to users. And I'm going to show you an example, and I want you to tell me if you think it works or not. Do you think this calculation will show the object? Okay.
No.
Do you think this one will show the object? Do you think this one will show the object? What about this one? What about that one? Now here's the interesting part about the hide object when is if I were just to look at this and read them, you could get to a point very easily that you could say, I know when it'll show. I know which one of these works and which ones don't. But what if you run into calculations that are the other way? What if you run into like this? Does that work? Does that object show on the screen for Robert or Josh?
The double negatives would just blow my head up.
Yes, this is exactly why this is such a great example, and I think we've probably all run into this at times. And do any of these work? Let's really are going to like, do any of these actually show the object on the screen? Now, the short answer is what we end up doing is we're trying to figure out how do we show this. Now, here are three that I know will work. Now I use this transition just because I think it's really cool, so you have to suffer with it. Now, as you're looking at those, which one of those is the most clear, natural, intuitive, and concise? Right, when we look at that bottom one, isn't it just easier to know? I know that's going to work. Like, I don't even have to test that one to know that it will show on the screen. And that's the whole concept of what we're trying to talk about. Like, when we're writing something, is it easy for people to understand and know without breaking your brain? Now, sometimes the nerdiest and the geekiest developers among us want to write it the more complicated way. And that's okay. There's nothing really wrong with that. You can test it. But if you're working with other developers, and especially if you're working with junior developers, please try to make it easy on them. Like, you get a win when it's easy because they make fewer mistakes. They can focus, instead of trying to figure out this complicated calculation, they can move on to solving the bigger problems, which will in turn make them better developers. All right, have you ever needed to use FileMaker's timestamp, but needed to get rid of those annoying seconds? Like, you just need the time, but no seconds. Yeah, me too. Have you ever needed to ride round to like the nearest 15 minutes? I think we've all been there at some point. We could write an expression that's the least expressive, that's like this. It works. It does exactly what we need it to do. But you may not necessarily remember how to write this every time you need to round time. So you're going to be a little more expressive, and you're going to write a custom function that handles the complexity for you. Say, all right, this is how we are going to round this time, and this is pretty easy to use. You can round it up or down depending on that last abbreviation or that last parameter, and you'll know exactly what happens. It's pretty easy to figure out. Again, reduces errors and makes it easier to write and easier to read, which allows us all to move a little bit faster and, again, focus on bigger problems. But the interesting thing about expressivity is that sometimes there's a line. When does being expressive start to hurt you? Now, here's a small example. This isn't really that dramatic, but maybe this is just a little bit too extreme. Now, you may have your business logic tied up inside of that custom function, and it never needs to change, which is fine if that's what you have. But if you were to run that calculation right now, what time would it give you? Now, again, if you were to run this at 10:41 a.m., in this particular case, the function gives you that because we're only pulling off of the seconds, and we're rounding to the minute instead of rounding to like the nearest 15 minutes. But again, you wouldn't know that from the name of the function. So again, this is where it comes back to, is what I wrote clear, natural, intuitive, and concise? And remember, any one of those factors, those elements, are not the key determining factor as to whether something's expressive. They kind of all need to work together. And if you haven't figured this out already, this is all very much more art than science. Okay, window mode. Do you have all these memorized? How many of you know what -1 and 5 does? What do they represent? If you get -1 or 5 in your calculation, something has gone sideways because they don't exist. Now, if you're reading this in code, would you immediately spot an error? Not necessarily, because -1, maybe you would question that. Like, that looks a little bit odd. There's no way get window mode would return -1. But if you saw get window mode equals 5, would you question it? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. If you were curious, you would go look and see, oh, there is no 5. This thing is not working correctly. This is a bug. But what if we were to make custom functions that handle that for us? Is there any reason we can't use is browse mode, is find mode, is preview mode? Is layout mode doesn't really help us because it only functions inside of the data viewer. But again, this becomes much more clear and natural to people when you can just say, I want this to show or hide based on the fact that we're in a browse mode or we're in find mode. Again, simple, and it's clear, and it's intuitive. So again, as you look at those different things that you would see in code, these all do the same thing. But you could say at the bottom, well, if not is browse mode. So we're not in browse mode. We're in something other than browse mode. We're going to do this next section of code. It's really, really simple and is a win for anybody having to read it. Okay, next, what if we need to do the same thing with handling triggers? One of the reasons I ended up making these functions was because of a problem that I ran into. I remember seeing variables in our code. There was $ triggers dot disabled and $ triggers underscore disabled. And I immediately thought to myself, we have a problem. Because like these triggers are now not being handled in this code all of the time, because it all depends on which one got called. As we started to investigate and look further into the DDR, this is what we started to see. And every one of these was in the code somewhere. Now, I would like to say that I didn't write any of these, but that's just not true. Raise your hand if you want me to explain how these work, or do you just not care?
I'm presuming
Right.
these files are being worked on by teams.
Yep. Yes. And the one reason I made them, and this is the why. Never again, like I never again had to worry about what the variable name was, because we just didn't use it. If we were going to set it or turn it off, just turn it on, turn it off, that was triggers.enable and disable. If I needed to know if it was on or off, I would just use one of the other two custom functions, and it knows where it lives. So these are all being set to a known variable, which again, one of the main things that helped me was now this autocompletes. I don't have to remember the variable name. I don't have to worry about another developer typing it differently. I just know that this is always going to work. And if something ever did happen where we end up having a variable collision because of some code that was written years ago, we can just go into the custom functions and change the variable name, and everything works perfectly. It's literally 10 seconds of work to go fix a problem like that. So this is what it would look like if you saw it in code. We're going to set a variable, or you could do it in an if statement, however you want to do it. It doesn't matter. You just do triggers.enable, you do a bunch of stuff, and then you disable the triggers. And whatever you need to do. It all just works super, super easy. At the top of a script that's running, like a subscript starts running while you're in the middle of another series of scripts. If it happens to pick up, you just say if triggers are disabled, you just exit that script and you're out. And again, I never ever have to worry about this not working again, unless somebody went and broke the custom functions, which doesn't happen often. Nobody touches them. So again, this is so easy to use. It's clear, it's natural, it's intuitive, and it's concise. Another area this works really well is when we have debug code. Like now, sometimes like when we're setting test variables where we want to really override the script parameter that's getting sent in, we're just trying to test a specific scenario. We can override this and say, hey, I want to use the debug code instead. And you can set specific variables for that. You can bypass certain scripts that maybe like send emails so they don't get sent out to your clients, or adjust the behavior of API calls. Again, the idea here is like when you see this in code, it almost becomes invisible because it's so easy to understand what it's doing.
Hey, Josh, we're
Yes.
getting a lot of questions. Is this going to be shared?
Is what going to be shared?
Your custom functions?
I can share them, yes. Yes. And I will talk to Lynn about how to the best way to share that with everybody.
Oh, absolutely. We can put it out on the, let's see, we can put it out on the mailing list, or we can post it on Meetup.
Sounds great. And if you need to, you guys can always bug me, because there's a good possibility that I'll get busy and forget to actually send it. So feel free to bother about it.
Hey, I'll make a note.
Okay. If nothing has scared you yet, then great. We're gonna go a little off the rails with this next one. And this next one made my my colleague Drew, that I worked with for 8 years, question my sanity for a little while. All right, now I know, I get it. I know how crazy this might look, But this does a little bit more than just get the script parameter. So again, we would use this just like we would get script parameter in a variable. The difference is, again, this just sets the parameter to a known variable. Again, you only know it if you went and looked at the custom functions. If you ever needed to grab the entire script parameter.data, it's there. And you can extract one key at a time because it's all JSON in there. Or you could list the keys of the values just like you can with JSON. Now, the really fun part about this was Drew really questioned my sanity and wanted to, like, I was in this very long and deep and disturbing obsession with custom functions at this point when I wrote these. But one of the problems I was running into often is a lot of times script parameters would come in and we're expecting JSON, but it's not. So then when you go to try to extract the JSON out, what you get is this last thing. You get an error. Now what happens is if you're testing for an empty variable, but your variable actually has this in it, it thinks it's true and it continues on its merry way thinking you have legitimate data, and you could end up with this really funny error all over your data, which is really not fun. But again, this goes back to the idea, once we started using this, and while Drew really questioned my sanity, he actually started using it even more than I was at the time. Because this handled everything for us. If we looked in that exclamation point variable, it would actually tell me when there was an error. The custom function just tells you, like, if this wasn't JSON, it tells you there. So you could see it while you were debugging it if something was wrong. You could also grab that data and throw it into like an error log and keep track of that and know when things went sideways with script parameters. And again, the other part of this is all autocomplete. I just SPG enter and it was done and I moved on. And I never again had to worry about where the script parameter variables were mistyped. It eliminated that entire problem. So all of those bugs all went away. And that was one of the hugest things that happened for me, was I just didn't have to worry about mistyped variable names anymore. And that was pretty huge for us. If you needed to pass in the whole parameter into another script, like if you're doing an HTTP request or an API call, again, you can just pass the whole thing in, just pass it through. And I had a whole another set of functions that were script result.get, and it would just kind of function the other way. And that's it. That's all the torture I can give you for today. So if we have questions or anything else, now's your time.
Well, I have a question.
Yep.
You probably have like a library of these custom functions that you transfer from file to file. How many are we talking?
I mean, that was most of them. There are a few other, like the one thing that I didn't show because I think it's just a much larger topic and concept are the error functions. But the error functions that we use mostly like at CityTech are, they're pretty solid. They're easy to use for the most part. And Dan Smith was kind of the brainchild behind those, and like they're fantastic. But they basically function the same way. They set the error variable for you, so you don't have to worry about it, and you can just get it. Again, all super easy. And then we use that to push into our logging, which is another set of, that's a whole script module for that stuff.
So this is part of your company best practices, is using these kinds of functions for clarity.
Yeah, we don't use all of the ones I showed there, but we have either versions of them. The script parameter ones we don't use.
Absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you, honey.
Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you, baby.
We have we don't use the script parameter ones there because I haven't fully corrupted them yet, but I'm working on it.
Okay, yeah, well, I'd like to see those too. Those look very interesting. Are there other questions or comments?
And one other comment I'll say on those script parameter ones, the one thing I have to pull out of there before I show those ones was the logging side, because when I originally wrote those, we weren't just doing error logging, we were logging every script that ran. So when it would do the script parameter.get, it would also add information to our logging variable. It was a global variable, and then we would just periodically write that out to another file and then clear it. So that piece I have to pull out because it's not useful unless you have the other part of it, which is all the logging. But that's a little harder to pull that out.
Yeah, Anton had his hand raised.
My question was actually, I kind of thought through and sort of solved it on my own. But I mean, I'm assuming that, you know, for these custom functions, if you're setting a known variable, that someone, I mean, if it's all being done within your own team, you guys know which variables are being set. So that way they're not being stepped on elsewhere. And then I thought
Yeah,
a little
and
bit
the
more.
secret is you just use some very uncommon format of a variable name. That's all. You just, you know, you can put a tilde in front of it, or, you know, you can do a lot of different things to make sure you don't overwrite that variable. But it's pretty,
Yeah.
and again, if you run into a collision, it's literally one spot you have to change, like, and you're done. Like, you never have to worry about it again, because all the stuff that I'm using it for, it's all temporary actions, right? So if you go and change it, there's nothing that kind of carries over to the next script. It just starts using the new stuff, and again, you never run into a collision again.
Yeah, that's why I lowered my hand.
Okay, anyone else? Questions? Comments?
Great. I have successfully scared them into silence.
I think they're all eating lunch. Tony.
Apologies, I was on mute. Hey, Josh and everyone. I very much like the first example because I happen to be looking at what we call get field name, table occurrence, or get field name, and I'll drop the version that I did this morning, coincidentally, kind of weird. And I like that you showed the SQL because the SQL has nothing to do with it, because that function where you get the table occurrence or the field name, that's a general thing. So I think that's the point you're making that I would agree with, even if you weren't making that point. I posted something controversial. That's my job. I come from New York City. About using the @ I was thinking about it, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong. It's I believe that custom functions are only called from within the calculation engine. So I'm warming up to the idea of using the @ as a prefix for custom function to get a little visual pop, and also because the people in New Zealand use them a lot. And just my 2 cents, but I thought it was very thought-provoking presentation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. And I have no comment on the using the @ symbol. Yeah, you can or can't. Like I've used it for some other things, mainly like developer layouts and things like that. But yeah, I'm not opposed to it as long as you're not using that layout or that function with something externally. Then it works fine. I don't have.
Yeah, and
anything
I'm thinking, Josh, to that point, and you know, once again, anyone here can correct me, and this is team group. I believe that custom functions are only called from the FileMaker calculation, therefore never called externally. Therefore, using characters outside of the alphanumeric and underscore range seems safe to me. I don't use that on the layout, so it's kind of reserved for custom functions, much like tilde is reserved for let functions. This is obviously a debate that's not going to be solved today.
I only judge you if you use emojis in your names because they're hard to type.
I would not do that. Maybe in a email.
Ian had a question, had his hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to say that I really enjoyed the talk. I think that it's also quite important to extend that to the names of scripts as well.
Yep.
That if you've got really clearly named scripts, it's enormously helpful. I had a situation a while ago where I had to go and revisit something that I wrote about 6 years ago, and it's 100% automated billing, and it's billing about £5 million a year. So when something broke, it was really, really important, and actually it was great that I could go back and 5 years later I could understand what I'd written because I'd named it nicely. It was a pleasant surprise. So
it's always nice when that works.
Yeah, it was very nice.
I know we had the same thing at the last company I worked at. You know, I think we all have at this point a singular email script when we're emailing something, and we handle everything there. And you know, we had just kind of transitioned to that at one point, and I remember I think there were like some 500 or 600 places we had to go to replace the code to use this one script instead of, the send mail step. And it was such great timing. It happened, I think it was less than a week after we made that change, that everything was being sent through Gmail, and Google went down, and we couldn't send email. It was pretty important for the business. And we also had Mandrill. We were using Mandrill app, and so it was one place I went in and I flipped one variable, and then we were sending everything through Mandrill, and the company was back up and running in literally 2 minutes. It was such an epic change that we made, and that was kind of where I really started going off the rails with custom functions also, because if we can encapsulate all that code into one place, it just made things so much easier. It reduced bugs, and there was just no downside to it.
See, that example kind of resonates at the moment, because about a couple of months ago, I had a client where I'd taken over an old system, and the prior developer had basically, whenever they'd asked for email, he just added it, and it was all using Gmail at the time. And when the Gmail stuff stopped working and they had to move to Microsoft because of changes in how things were authenticated, I found that I basically had to deal with over 150 separate scripts sending emails, which was just giant pain. But anyway.
Yeah, that stuff hurts.
It does, yeah.
Great. Anyone else? Comments, questions? Let's see, what is this? Okay. Well, okay, I guess we're going to thank Josh for his presentation. Really, really great stuff. We'll all look forward to the examples and continuing the conversation when he gets further refinements done. So thank you very much, Josh. I'm going to pause the recording. And I wanted to say welcome to Rick Kalman, but before we get started with his presentation, since Chris Moyer isn't with us, he's traveling today. Does anyone have any news or announcements that might, fit into what we're interested in? Anyone?
Chris does it better.
He does do it better. He does it marvelously. So Bob, you suggested this. I thought you had something. Okay.
Well. No, actually I didn't. I just there's just a suggestion, bud.
Okay. So Rick, are you open to questions during your presentation, or should we hold them?
No, I will leave it to your discretion, Lynn, because sometimes in context makes sense. So.
Okay, so I will say share your screen and have at it.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for being here with us today.
Sure. All right, I'm assuming you can see my screen.
Yes.
And the title you see there, I'm not that clever. So I told Lynn, here's what I think I'm going to talk about. Can you suggest the title for it? And Lynn came up with this clever title. I liked it. So I'm keeping it. So, hey everyone, I'm Rick Kalman. Probably most of you know me. I've been at Claris or FileMaker or Apple for, gosh, I think I'm coming up on my 24th year in August, and been a product manager for about 19 of those years, and looking after FileMaker and still doing that. So essentially what I'm going to talk about is I'll do a high-level highlight of 2024 just to sort of tee up what I want to talk about towards the end of this presentation. Giving some context, I'm not going to do a deep dive. One, I'm a director now, so I can't even do a deep dive because I'm not the product manager working exactly with the engineers and every nitty-gritty detail. However, these have been done already. They're recorded and they're out there. And you've got Douglas Wallace, you've got Connor Brock for those. But I will give you my take on that, and let's just make sure this thing will advance. So I want to also talk about, as most of you are probably aware, in Austin in February, at the Engage keynote, we announced that we would be sharing a public product plan and backlog, both for product and marketing. And then we made this page live, and it had a lot of what you ended up seeing in 2024 on that plan. But the thing that was nice about it, as we were saying, okay, these are the things that are coming next, then also you have an opportunity to be able to click on it or upvote it. So it became very interesting to see the kinds of things that people were most interested in, and very useful, right? For instance, I would not have guessed going in that one of the highest rated things would be 3 enhancements we made to JSON arrays, but I'm not surprised. But so that was interesting. So I want to talk about here is that we have also a backlog on there, and we have it sort of set up as, if it says it's in progress, then that is, those are the things that we're going to release next, either in an update or in a major, like a FileMaker 2025 type thing. So most of everything that was in progress has come off, and I'll get to that in a second. But there's still backlog items left on there as well. And and so I'll talk a little bit about those, because what will happen is in the next couple of weeks, I will flesh out the next things that are in progress and that are coming off of our roadmap as well. And then of course, then you see the list towards the bottom of this now is a long list of the things that were in progress that now are delivered. But what I wanted to call out before we go into the deck about the high level 2024 is some of the things that rose to the very top in that list. And starting with what you can see here is native support for Let's Encrypt. Was one of the highest, but then, as I just mentioned, those enhancements we made to JSON arrays came pretty darn close to it, right? And I think it's more speaks to how people are using FileMaker and Server these days, and how important APIs have come, and of course JSON and APIs lend themselves to be together. Also, very highly rated was the ability to do the write operations with the execute data API, especially if you're doing things with automation, if you're a hosting provider, if you've got an SBA, and you're pushing things out in an automated fashion. Support for perimeters and script names in the callback script performed on Server came up really high. We also are now supporting upload and download via the admin API. That rated very high. And a few other things, revert transaction and subscript. So this, as a product manager, is useful to me, especially as we get close to a launch, to begin to say, okay, what are the things we really need to make sure that we want people to pay attention to? And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk about, from my point of view, some of the highlights of what we just released last month with FileMaker 2024. That there was a lot of stuff in there, but we'll start with AI, right? Of course, everyone realizes that we released what essentially is the ability to use large language models inside FileMaker with your data. And now, there was a blog that was came from Geest earlier this week, and I thought Todd had the best description that I've seen so far about how to think about what this is. And Todd said, think of vector embeddings like FileMaker field indexes, but unlike traditional text indexes, we're creating an index of meaning with our data with the help of large language models, or LLMs. According to Todd, this unlocks the capabilities of semantic search, which is the concept of searching data based on similarity of meaning rather than similarity of text representation. So in a way, it's the ability to not have to very explicitly tell it, oh, I'm looking for this, or say, give it some wildcards and stuff, and you can't ever really get there, or you have to be super precise. Whereas large language models are essentially just giving you the statistics of the affinity of words and the relationship to each other. And if you search on that, then you get what Todd is talking about here. And in a way, it's not a perfect one-to-one, but one of the first features as a product manager that I ever was involved with was the web viewer object in FileMaker 8.5. And I can remember first people going, well, why would you put a web browser in a database? We already have a web browser. And my thing is, I thought the same thing. I took a walk when I first inherited that feature, and I realized, well, gosh, wouldn't it be great if the data in your database could drive where the web viewer was going, right? And all of a sudden, people were doing things with that web viewer object that we had never really ever thought about or contemplated. I can remember there was one DevCon, they were called DevCons at the time, where the entire DevCon was practically about ways that you could exploit the web viewer object. You had Digital Fusion that was building brand new Flash-based FileMaker interfaces. People were doing charting. They were doing these gorgeous interfaces before Heather had even got to the design surface for this little thing we added, so that a feature was highly leverageable, and it has been over the years. And I think in similar, this is what the advent of being able to embed large language models inside FileMaker with the data you already have to leverage that. And my contention is it'll take several months, a year, for y'all to get your head around this and figure out how to exploit it. And there will be maybe the next Engage, if not that, certainly the one after that, which will be all of the ways that you guys figured out how to take advantage of this. And of course, this is a space it's moving so radically fast that, who knows where it's going to be at that time. We're just barely at the scratching the surface. In high level, there's a number of things we did. I'm not going to go into details here. But you can perform a semantic find on your embedded model that you could either have in a text field. If you saw Ronnie's session yesterday, essentially putting it in as a binary in a container field is a little bit more performant because it's a little bit smaller. We've added some new calculations, and I'll talk about those in a second. And then we have also put into the product through the scripts and calculations the ability to configure the account and do logging. For instance, if you're managing tokens, and if you're using something like OpenAI that charges for tokens, and a way of monitoring how many you're using, so you can get a sense of what it might cost you, is there as well. And then on top of that, it's in the product. You really just point it at your data. You don't have to do anything else other to your data other than to say that this is what you're acting upon. And then, as I said earlier, it leverages the similarity in meaning between words versus having to be much more specific and prescriptive when you're doing finds in the traditional way. And then one of the things we're also looking at, and I think Ronnie even demoed this, or maybe Wade at Engage demoed this, but using RAG technology, which is, I can't remember what the acronym means anymore. I'm sure someone on the line does, but the ability to, say, walk through a PDF document and then to parse it out, ask questions of it, and have it come back in a similar fashion that you would expect when you're asking ChatGPT something, is something also that's going to be, we're working on. It'll be coming out later as we continue to iterate on this. And then, of course, this is not our first foray into AI. We've been doing this for a while. In fact, people were doing already just using FMP URL and the FMP script step to do interesting things already that you can do with just APIs in general. But remember back in FileMaker 19, we supported Core ML and the chips on the devices, first starting with iOS devices, and now they're also available on Mac. Claris Connect is the ability, it's got connectors for OpenAI and Clarify. And then we introduced a number of new scripts that are all dedicated to the ability to take advantage of large language models in FileMaker, as well as a number of calculations as well. So those are listed there. So that I think is, I'm looking forward. I'm sure we're already seeing it, but I'm sure even at the coming Engage that I think we'll be announcing soon when and where it is, if we haven't done that already. You'll be seeing stuff already that I think will blow your socks off. But I predict after that that you're going to see a lot more coming from the community with these capabilities that we gave you. Before I go on, Lynn, is there any questions or anything that people have that you would want to insert at this point, or if not?
Okay, we have Ian says retrieval augmented generation is RH.
Thank you. Yeah. Once you get to the acronyms, you forget what they actually mean, and it's so fun just to say RAG that I forgot to what it meant. Thank you. Anything else? All right, I'll go on.
Okay.
All right, so I'll talk a bit about new script steps and functions, leveraging the data API, JSON, and transactions. I mentioned these sort of in my preamble, and because they were coming off of our public backlog. But some of the enhancements we've made, supporting write operations, especially if you're doing things with automation, immediately people that are doing things like automatic stuff are taking advantage of these types of capabilities. The ability to revert a transaction inside a subscript, making it a lot easier to be able to write your scripts and not have to do so much overhead for trapping for errors and that sort of thing. So that was something very popular. There were 3 enhancements we made to the ability to act upon JSON arrays that were very popular, and it's so much interrelated with what people are already doing with the APIs and with JSON and now, of course, with LLM, that even though I wouldn't have guessed that it would receive that, wasn't surprised, but it was great information. And then, of course, the enhancements of getting live text as JSON and being able to pull meaning out of things like text and images. If any of you are using that on your iPhone and iPad now, it comes in very handy. Take a screenshot of something and be able to copy and paste the text. That's been extended as well to the Mac operating system. It was something that we initially had on iOS. We have continued to enhance OData. We aren't 100% there, but we're pretty darn close, and our intention is to get all the way to OData 4.01 compliance. And of course, it'll continue to go on, and we'll keep up with that. But think about, OData is essentially the REST API equivalent or replacement of ODBC, with a lot of versatility in there. And also, because we're supporting more and more of the OData 4.0 standard, there are some interesting things you can do in acting upon the schema in your solutions. Some additional refinements. This new Open Quickly, you will see an asterisk next to that, and the reason is I know what people are saying about it, and I'm going to tell you what we're going to do about it, and we're paying attention to it. So just a little asterisk. So if questions come, I'm going to get to what we're going to do there next, sooner rather than later. But Open Quickly essentially is like macOS Spotlight, but now you can act upon the FileMaker app that you have open, the file, and you can do the Command K and get Spotlight type search and be able to find scripts, layouts, and so on, and then jump right to them as well. So Depending upon how you use that, you either love it or you're not going to use FileMaker 2024 until we give you the ability to control it. So you're either on one or the other of those sides. Then local notifications is now also supported in FileMaker Pro, so that it essentially takes advantage of local notifications on your Mac OS and iOS device, which we had before, so that you can send those. Let's say a server process is done running, you can send a message to the desktop of the client. And then on the import log, we now include themes and value lists so that you can get more information and insights out of that log. And as always, we continuously invest in every release in performance, stability, and reliability. The FileMaker 2024 release in total has about 200 sort of in-market customer reported issues that were addressed. Many of these come directly to us, either through what we call Ring Zero. You know, a number of times I've had someone with the SBA saying, "Oh my God, the server's going down 3 times a week. I'm going to go out of business." We typically send them right to Lucy Chen and our Ring Zero. Our engineers work directly with them, and we've been doing that since 19.x era. It allows us to work, our engineers to work directly with the person that's having the issue, giving them special builds upstream of even ETS to see if they address that. And once they do, we drop it into ETS and we drop it into the market. So that in and of itself was a huge breakthrough in our ability to be able to address some of these things that that were dogging us for a long time. I think, you know, one of the ultimate sins is for your server to go down. Its only reason to exist in the world is to stay up and to be boring, and you can just rely on it, right? And so, because it is the fulcrum of the platform. So we continue that. We get feedback, obviously, from ETS. Every morning, I'm in the community looking at what is coming out of the community and sending that to our teams to take a look at the things that are popping out of there. We also have begun to resume kitchens. Most of all of them are virtual these days, but I think I've done 4 or 5 in the last few months on application lifecycle management. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And these are the intention. Any of you who used to be or would have attended in the past one of our physical kitchens at the Wedge, we would have 2 or 3 days. People would come in from all over the world on their own dime. I was always amazed of that. And they'd fill the auditorium, and our, Chris Krim and Clay Makel and John Thatcher and our engineers would get up and say, "Okay, here's what we're going to do in the next release. And you guys give us feedback." And I can remember people raising their hand and going, "This is great, but how about you talk to us before you've decided what you're going to do, so that we can, have some influence on that." So these are really what we're doing with these kitchens now, is while it's really early on, to go to a cohort of people that are associated with what the enhancement we want to make and ask them what it is that they need us to enhance to be able to accomplish what they're trying to do. I'll talk a little bit about more of that in a second. But the ability to do that was really opened up when we went agile, because when we were waterfall, everything was decided. I knew practically a year in advance what was going to come out the other end, and it was very much codified. It wasn't as fluid, it wasn't as agile as you will. But in 19, we were able to blow the socks off of that, and be able to drop enhancements into the platform all along the way without having to wait for these punctuated large releases. That being said, I still contend that FileMaker 2024 was as big as any of our annual, if not annual releases, if not bigger. It was a pretty big release. So it wasn't as agile as I would like. There were some reasons for that, having to do with some unexpected operating system things that we had to address from Apple, that sort of threw that off, making it a larger release. And I'll pause here, Lynn, if there's any other questions before I go on.
I am not seeing any right at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. Next, I'll talk about something that's like I said was top rated. It's been asked for a long time. This is native support for certificates, and then also we've done some additional optimization for server administrators through our Universal Admin Console. But the big one is we have had that request for a number of years to support Let's Encrypt. It's free or cheap, but it also essentially what we did is we came up with a script that we ship with server that runs at the system level, that once you set it up, automates the renewal of Let's Encrypt and goes out there and automatically keeps it updated, because everything every 90 days, within the first 60 days, or if 60 days pass, you can update it. But every 90 days, you have to refresh that. Of course, there's a lot of burden there to have to do that kind of thing. So we did it in an automated fashion, but we that's been something that has been pretty popular for as we could solve from the feedback we got from the public roadmap. And then we went into for server admins, and we essentially revamped the interface for managing schedules, put them in the same place. We didn't separate backups over here and other schedules over there, and then you have to keep in mind. We made it a lot easier. You could move columns around, you could filter by different things, and the interface is just a lot better for managing those schedules. Put in a new ability to, when you're going to bring the server down, you want to make some changes, you can now, as a server admin, block new users from connecting while you're trying to get the other people who are already connected off, at least preventing other ones from coming in that you have to kick off. Just a nice little developer or server admin quality of life enhancement. Got some enhancements for administrator roles, getting some more versatility there if you want to segment and give different administration roles to different teams, and they're responsible for their stuff, but they don't cross over and touch other stuff. We've made some enhancements there. Also, the ability to know who the server admin is that you need to contact, and then some optimization of the Ubuntu swap file, which helps with things like stability and performance. And then I talked about earlier about application lifecycle management, and I'm running some kitchens on that, and I've got an end-to-end sort of vision of what we're trying to bring to the market. But some things that we did in 2024, of course, we already mentioned the admin API is now scriptable for upload and file download. The FileMaker developer command line tool also now allows you to rename files, which is part of the automation potentially. And then we hash script steps and layout objects when we do save as XML. That helps tools like Spectre Pro or some of the other ones out there to be able to detect changes. Then, as far as enhancements made for FileMaker Go, in a few areas, I essentially would talk about it mainly as bringing more parity with what you can already do with FileMaker. So we opened up expanded the ability of what can be in a FileMaker Go container field, essentially any binary type now. On import, also was pretty limited. You could import .fmp12, but not a CSV or a tab. So we just expanded that out to what you would expect. Heck, I think it even supports merge now, .merge, which still has some utility based on the format. And then the get live text as JSON also provides metadata that scripts can then extract text from images. And so that's a nice enhancement as well. Of course, you got the camera on these devices. And so it's something that people take advantage of. Then there's support. Widgets now support the ability to have, I think, up to four or five, I can't remember, of favorite apps that show up in a little the widget on your iOS device, and also you have the ability when your end user launches FileMaker Go, rather than going into the container that then has other things, it's not something necessarily that everyone expects. On the launch of Go, you can say, I want it to automatically launch this file, similar to what you could do in the past on Mac operating system. And then there the ability to launch apps in Safari with one tap from Go. So rather than being inside Go, you can essentially instantiate Safari, because you don't want it to be in there because you're taking advantage of something that Safari is better at doing. So we made that easier to and possible to do. So before we go on to what's next, because what I want to do is next is talk to you about so what is coming next, and what as I said, what you will see is probably in the next couple of weeks. I will add in progress or some backlog items, depending upon where they are. We are right on the cusp of beginning to implement a 3-year product roadmap that we have been putting together, that continually looks out, and that's a rolling roadmap. So, we'll splice it up and say, here's the kind of things we're going to go for trying to accomplish in the next year. And so those are the ones I'll talk to you about. I'll allude to some of the ones that are a little bit further out because they're related to those. But before I switch over to that side, which is probably what most people want to hear about, Lynn, if there's any specific questions that I should answer before we do that.
Well, Tony White had a couple of comments about Open Quickly. Tony?
Yeah, let me I dropped them in the chat. Let me just flesh them out as always. Rick, 2 questions on the Open Quickly feature. I've been watching different listservs and whatnot. I saw your slide earlier. It says that Open Quickly addresses databases, which means files, layouts, and scripts. I attended a presentation where someone from FileMaker mentioned table occurrences, and everyone got really excited about that. So what code objects are addressed? Are table occurrences addressed? There was a lot of excitement about that.
Tony, off the top of my head, I can't say yes or no because I don't remember. I know the 3 that you did and we listed, but I'm not sure on that one.
Well, it'll all sort out over time. If it does indeed address table occurrences, I bang the drum on that one because that's a crowd pleaser. If I may, I've got a second question, same topic. Open Quickly. Oh, there's once again, a little bit of a debate. Savvy developers with different opinions in terms of what the privilege, what can Open Quickly do? In other words, can it run a script only if it's shown in the script menu with a little checkbox, or can it run any script that that particular account with that particular privilege set has the ability to execute as said in the privilege set, or is it some other this? And same question for different code objects. That one's a bit more complicated. You might want to take it offline, but I just point out that there's different understandings being promulgated as to how it works, which would impede adoption.
Yeah, it's a good segue into. I've asked that we do an update to FileMaker. I'm pushing for August next month. I really think that we have to go back and we've got to address Open Quickly. Philosophically, from my point of view, I like Open Quickly as a developer, as I'm developing and I've got full admin access and I'm in the schema and it's a great tool for me to find stuff and navigate around. I'm much less comfortable with also opening that up to end users, especially if it requires developers to have to then go into custom menus and do something, even if they're not using custom menus, only to control something. That's an undue burden. So what you'll see us do is give you the ability to decide for your files if that is something you even want to make available, right? For an end user, you know, a lot of people didn't bother to remove the scripts or uncheck something, and all of a sudden what you thought was, even though it wasn't rock solid, you could talk to Stephen Blackwell about security and ersats and all that, but all of a sudden you've given an easier way for a customer to go in, use Command K, and trigger a script outside of the flow that you might have designed for that, because you happen to leave a box unticked, or you know, didn't have the privilege there. In a way, it sort of like opens your eyes about, oh, well, I have some vulnerabilities there, but that wasn't our intent. So anyway, we'll come back after that. We'll probably we'll put a build out there. We're going to drop it into ETS, get your feedback before we ship it, and we'll try to dial it in. But I just don't like the mix of an end user can trigger a script outside of how you intended it to be triggered. But I do like the ability, and especially as Tony, as you said, for things like table occurrences, you know, in a way you can find it, click on it, go to it. It's like deep linking, right? And it's just such a great productivity tool. We're also trying to figure out, you know, what do I do when I have 10,000 things showing up in that list? I mean, is it even useful? So we're also trying to come up with ways to make that far more usable.
Let me just one quick follow, Rick. So spot on everything you just said. It sounds like you're on the absolute right track. You know, maybe forking it between developer feature. I view it primarily, speaking only for myself, primarily as a developer feature.
Yep.
And you know, I'd rather like use the pre-existing code that controls where the user, even if it's UI based, even if it isn't security based, even if it isn't rock solid. A lot of code out there of that way. The other thing that I think you might, let me just give you a feature suggestion here, the DDR, when you do a DDR, right? And this came up at a previous presentation for the England group, one of the FileMaker people were there. And one of the things said, like, and you just said it, you know, what if there's 1,000 things in the list? It's too much, it's too much. The DDR, when you run a DDR in a multi-file solution, you have the opportunity to choose the files that are covered and the code objects. And that existing code with all those checkboxes that would give you the ability to be a little bit more granular and targeted, and therefore see a smaller list relevant to what you're looking for. That particular code would, in my opinion, if possible, would be a useful filter for the open quickly feature. And that's all I got to say. Thanks.
Yeah. Great suggestion. Yeah.
Rick, Josh Ormond has a comment about the new bug where data and schema are going missing.
Okay.
Josh?
Yeah, I think on the community, I don't know, was it a month ago? It might have been Howard's post. I can't remember who posted it. There was a bug where the files were closed, and when they opened them back up on the server, they basically lost like 30 days worth of data and schema changes.
Yeah, I saw that on the community. I forwarded that to the team. I think that fix is going to be in the update, the FileMaker Pro update I'm talking about, but I'm not 100% sure. But we're definitely looked at it. We're able to replicate it. So that's always the biggest battles. Once we can replicate something, we can address it.
So sorry, this is how I originally reported it, and I was followed up by some other people. Are you saying that the engineers have been able to replicate it, or
yeah? Yeah, I think yes. Based on the just what was posted on, I think someone had reported something similar, and they were able to triangulate on it. But I believe so. But I could go back and check. But yeah, we're definitely aware of that one.
If you're able to point out like how you were able to replicate it, so that maybe in the meantime we can try to make sure we are avoiding it.
Yeah, if there's any do this or don't do this rules, that would be helpful.
That would be very helpful. I haven't been able to replicate it, but you know, again, it is just one of those like super scary bugs that kind of had us concerned.
Yep. Yeah, we're always trying to knock down bugs that would prevent you all from adopting our latest and greatest. And we know that your caution for sure, just coming from, you know, experience that, you know, a lot of people do, but a lot of people don't jump on the first major release. They wait for the first 1 or 2 updates to correct those kind of things. There's always stuff that gets out in the wild because, let's face it, in ETS, it's really not possible to put the product through all of its paces because you can't deploy it into production. And it's not until it's in production you're doing real stuff that all of the bugs, as product managers, when we start to put together demos for the upcoming release, that's when we would discover the bugs, not when we were looking at each individual feature. When we were trying to build something holistic, then they would come out. And so I think that because of the nature of how ETS, things get out in the wild. So it's not bad wisdom, right, for people to say, I'm going to wait. On top of that, let's face it, it's burdensome to swap out a server, especially if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So there's got to be a compelling reason, even though we've made it easier and easier to update servers, it still has to be a compelling reason, and we get that. All right. So
servers, Steve Abrahamson had a question. Unmute yourself, dear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Just a quick question on server. There was a question that came up a couple of years ago about server no longer being available in the future on macOS. Has that direction changed around? Just wondering what the current thinking is on that. And also, are we at 2023 with server, but 24 with the app? Or is there a 24 server?
Yeah, there's 24 server. What there isn't the 2024 of, but there will be next week is the FileMaker Cloud. And that's only because we wait for about a month before we push out Cloud to catch those bugs I'm talking about so that we don't have to turn the crank again because we've got AMIs and AWS and syncing. So everything is Server and Pro are at the 2024 versions. Cloud will be next week. There was some thought that, gosh, could we get away with not having a Mac server and just have Ubuntu and Windows, and because it would save us? To me, it's like, no, yeah, maybe someday, but no. Linux and Mac OS are not close to each other. However, if you're doing things like hosting or having to pay for your servers, and people love Linux for that kind of thing, it's got a lot of versatility. But I would be very reluctant to remove anything like support for an operating system. It's just so integral in my mind to what makes FileMaker that tool where you almost never have to tell someone no. Right. And that the reality is this, and this is what really led me to that, is there are people that just aren't comfortable with Linux and don't want to learn it, and that's fine. But there are also places that have no choice. They're a Windows shop or they're a Mac shop, and ISD is not going to support them running Linux. So I don't want to fire those customers, right? So I always contend that, sure, it may cost us more to build it and test it, but we're making far more revenue by having it than by what we would be saving. Otherwise, we could save the most money by not building anything at all, right? We'll save a ton of money. We just won't make any more money. So anyway, been here long enough to realize that, there was also some, only everyone's a Mac user and we don't really need Windows. It's like, look, maybe the people that are in ETS are 3/4 Mac and 1/4 window, but that isn't where is really there. Remember, this is a Windows world, right? Business is run on Windows. And what about those in-house corporate people that you never really see or hear from? It's at least 50-50 in my mind, right? And again, why would I remove something that's a competitive advantage? Almost none of our competitors run both rich fat clients on Mac and Windows, or let alone even have rich fat clients, right? So then I lose a competitive advantage. If you need it, you have it, right? I mean, the magic FileMaker. I build it once, and for the most part, it doesn't care what operating system I deploy it on or what device. That's a little bit of the magic, right? Throwing away magic, I'm more cautious of it. Maybe, when I leave and more young people come in that don't have the experience and want to try something new, and sometimes we'll hit on something that'll work. A lot of times you won't. Anyway.
Well, thank you. That's all fantastic to hear. Thank you very much.
All right.
Hey, future stuff.
All right. Oops. Let me get to need to be again. So I got no slides going forward because I'm going off road a little bit, and I want to because I did talk to you about that we are currently fleshing out a 3-year roadmap, and I'll talk to you about some of the things that are coming next. As I said, these will probably in the next couple of weeks end up refreshing on the community, the public product plan. Right now, you can see most of the stuff there. It was delivered. There are a few other things that there as well. Still there on our backlog that I would like to point out, though, are something that are worth pointing out. We are coming back after the JavaScript add-ons, right? We've sort of let them languish, and we are not happy with the way that they have to be managed, in that you have to create, layouts and they become cumbersome to update and so on. So what we're looking at is moving to a place that Draco provides, or FileMaker app itself provides, that it's its own space to have these things contained in, that then you could act upon and instrument with an inspector. And then we could also leverage that for other things, for instance, AI. So this sort of place where you can have a scratch table or scratch space that you can draw upon without having to, set up necessarily, globals and all that kind of thing in order to get at. So I think that one not only improves the JavaScript add-ons, making them much less cumbersome, easier to update and so on, but we'll be able to leverage it as well for things like AI and others. And the other thing that's really big on there right now, got a ton of upvotes, is this this whole free tier of Claris, and hey, we told you about it like 2 years ago, I think it is. And it's like, where is it, right? That is absolutely still there. And we're committed to doing that. Brad says, don't let me get on stage at Engage and make me a liar of what I say, right? So this is one of those things that he keeps an eye on. Yeah, so anyway, I just want to let you know, there are some things on the backlog that are still there. We're still talking about, and we'll do it as soon as we can figure out all of the licensing permutations. But we've gone pretty far down the path of figuring out how we can do it free. The thought is here is you ought to get the entire platform. You ought to get FileMaker Pro and FileMaker Server. Obviously, Go you can get already, Studio and Connect, and you shouldn't have to pay us anything. Think about, rather than a 45-day trial, how about just having a trial that's got limits? Like, you can host to one other person to test that it works, but you can't deploy it. When you realize, and this is, as a new user, right, for the most part, when you realize that you can use our tool for what you think you want to use it for, and you can even build something with it, and now you want to deploy it, then you give us money, right? And one of the things this helps set off is, if we sell the smallest 1-year annual volume license of 5 seats to a brand new user, then that is our grade. And so, and you get a 1-year license, and so your renewal is up in a year. Our greatest attrition comes in that first year, because that's the learning curve, right? But if it's the second renewal, it jumps up to the mid 80% of renewal. And so, but what happens is, somewhere in that first year, probably early on, we lost that renewal, that person, because they could never figure out how to get over the hump of what you need to learn in FileMaker. So one, it helps with that. The other thing is that I found that's universal over all the years, and it hasn't changed, is people that succeed with our product, as you know, they don't need to be a computer programmer or a DB or anything like that, but they have to do sort of what we call tech savvy, and a couple of ways of what I think is tech savvy. Tech savvy is someone who's not afraid that they're going to break something if they explore, right? We all know those people. And they just have too much fear to ever learn. And they're probably the person, if let's say you have a work group, a team, they're probably the person that people on that team go ask before they go ask IS&T, tech savvy, right? So that's you know, that helps a lot. Second is, you're never going to succeed with our product unless you have a specific problem you're trying to solve. And the reason is you're motivated to solve that specific problem. And that's what you need to get over the hump of the learning curve of our product, right? So it's, we believe that we will lose money in finished goods. We know that. We'll go eyes in, eyes open. But the thought would be that a freemium version would completely offset and multiply much more that we would lose from finished good for the person that just buys a one-off copy. Because let's face it, FileMaker is a great personal data munging tool. I use it all the time to transform data that I'm pulling in and putting out the other side. And some people do buy it from that. It's a small percentage of our business these days, but that will go away. So the only reason as an organization could stomach that kind of loss is to have the belief that, okay, I lost $7 million in finished good, but I made $20 million more because I opened up the floodgates. Now students can have it. It can be used everywhere. I can experiment with it. I can prove to myself on my own timeline I need it. So that's my long pitch for, yes, we still intend to do free tier. Okay, so now some of the things that are coming down the pike. This first one I call the Unified Claris Platform. And this really is about addressing the fragmentation issues that use developers are seeing today when you're attempting to access and leverage the broader Claris ecosystem. A long way of saying, when you're trying to use FileMaker and Connect and Studio, good luck. Right? It's just, so there's a number of things where Connect and Studio don't yet graft gracefully into the FileMaker platform in a way that you would expect a platform to be, so that if you have a Claris platform that is made up of those other things, that you can think of it the same way you think of FileMaker, in the way that it's integrated together as a single platform, especially if you're a new user. Right? It's like, how are you to understand what the heck is the Claris platform if there's no center of gravity, right? And so, but then there's disparities that we need to work out between those products. We've got a lot more work to do on centralized identity or Claris ID and access management, and making them complementary and have the same kind of control and power you have with FileMaker, or not having the tyranny of having to set up Claris IDs, but just point to something you're already using, Active Directory or Azure or whatever, and have that do the same thing. And then platform consolidation. And what I mean by that is what I was talking about is, you're a new user. It's like, where is this platform? There's 3 separate products, right? There's this FileMaker Pro thing, and then there's this Studio thing, and it's got a whole different way of building, but you can also build something there. And then there's this Connect thing, right? So it needs to appear as a platform, needs to behave as a platform. And for instance, I always contend that Claris Connect should have always been a part of the FileMaker platform. Always. It was intended to be. When we called for it on stage at DevCon and saying we have a missing column of emerging technologies, and one of them was that, we went out and we found Stamp Play, but then the decision was made to sell as a separate product. It is just going to be part of the Claris platform. On top of that, we are investing more, because it's been languishing there as investments, as we've been looking at the Fuji side of the house. If you're familiar with what we're doing with Apple and the Apple School Manager and integration that's built on top of Claris Connect, and that was starving us for some resources, but we've put together a team to begin to flesh out Connect, so that it's more and more possible to use it as an integral part of your FileMaker deployments. The second area is what I call commerce engine and licensing. And this is simplifying our licensing model, super complex to figure out how to give us money, right? I mean, I sometimes I like to say that, you know, and you know, hopefully the marketing people aren't listening, but you know, with FileMaker, it's like, you know, part of the things that limits us as far as, you know, size is there's only whatever money that we make is there's only that many people in the world that will subject themselves to the gauntlet that we make them go through to prove that they're worthy of using our platform, right? So that now it's true because all of you have proven you're worthy and you can make the thing sting, right? But remember how long it took you to get there. And you know, the thing is about FileMaker, you're never going to be done learning it. It's like a musical instrument. When are you done mastering that musical instrument? When you put it down or you die, right? Other than that, you think Eric Clapton doesn't still practice on, you know, and get better at the guitar, you know, that, so it's an instrument, right? And so it's, you know, there's always more things to learn on it, but we're trying to reduce the barrier of, you know, in a way, the hope and the thought of if we really nail Studio and connect together is an easy way to get into the platform that once you hit that sort of invariable, that brick wall that you hit because you can only do so much with it, similar to what happens with Airtable. Well, guess what? Unbeknownst to you, it's setting on top of a vastly powerful platform that we have been iterating for 40 years. It has 1,500 people in the world that know how to make that thing sing. So if I can pull them in through Studio and Connect, and then give them to you guys once they need to go beyond that, then we all win, right? So that's sort of the vision we have. So there's two things under the Commerce Engine license. One is to have a Claris Commerce Engine that is more versatile, that maybe ideally that you guys could even tap into and leverage, and that would allow you to do things like self-serve with your software and that sort of thing. There's the next big section, and I call this platform modernization and new capabilities. And these are around addressing market expectations and gaps that are either caused by technical debt that we've incurred along the way as we've built out this platform over the years, or building capabilities that take us into the future. So one of the things we're looking at is a UI refresh of FileMaker. We'll start with the Mac OS. It's been a while since Heather did her thing on the design surface. So we're beginning to look a bit dated. So we'll go after that. We will continue, as I said earlier, to make enhancements to AI that we've already put in, but we are at the very beginning of this new era, and it is moving very, very fast, and it's leveraging itself to move even faster, right? Because, for instance, some of the things that we thought we were going to do with RAG, I think ChatGPT came out with something like a month or so ago that blew away what we thought we were going to do and made it like 10 times faster. But it was a different way of doing it. So that's how fluid and fast things are moving. So one of the ways we're trying to address that is give you the hooks into these things, but not lock you in because it's going to evolve so quick. And one of the things we're looking at is, it's not lost on us about co-pilots, right? Now, the thing about them is the problem of, and I really resonate with this because I have been with the Claris community all the way before we used to have the old email-based listserv, and all the way through. And what I know is that someone asks a question and people answer it. How do you know that that's the right answer? That's the best way to do it, you know? And so how would AI know? It's just scrub the entire, you know, the web and all the information that as long as the internet has been there, because let's remember, FileMaker is actually older than our ability to put something on the internet. We way predate that. But as long as we've been around, people have been posting things. And so ChatGPT knows a tremendous amount about how to write scripts and how to write calculations. But what it doesn't know is what is the very best or one of the very best ways to do that. And of course, you can do things like have people give thumbs up and thumbs down and begin to influence and train it. But you got to be careful there on that kind of thing. Is like, this isn't magic. right? I mean, in the end, it's a parlor trick. It's not actually really intelligent, right? And but you know, if I could tell something what my intent, and it could do most of the authoring of the script for me, and I can go in and tweak it. It's like some of us are using Chat GPT. I'm going to throw it some stuff. Here's a sentence. I want a executive summary. I'm going to throw it to Chat GPT, see what comes back. I'm going to read it and go, oh, that's pretty good, but I want to change this, and this. I didn't have to spend all that time crunching it down in the first place, but I still get final editorial. And at the same token, you know, all of us as developers are probably going, okay, co-pilots, AI, am I even going to have a job, or my end users just going to tell it what they want and it auto magically appears? I don't think we're close to that for most of us here anyway. Probably someday we'll get there, but we'll continue going down this path. And it is, you know, it's wide open, and it's still, you know, it's still not clear how this stuff is all going to settle. I already mentioned application lifecycle management. Essentially, we're looking soup to nuts, all the way from a DevOps process where I can have a development server, a staging server, a production server, and automate it through that. We are the kitchens that I've just run and it's still running. Right now, we're focusing on the developer tools that are command line that SBAs and hosting providers and some of the larger implementations are already leveraging as they are. We've gone back to those that cohort and asked them, what do they need these things to do in order to go to the next level? And all of this is heading to the holy grail of being able to serialize and deserialize FileMaker files and schema, and to be able to use things like Git to be able to leverage those things, so I could patch a file, right, without having to wholly replace it. And we're working through those things. So it would include the you know, I build it, I test it, I stage it, I deploy it, I troubleshoot it with tools like Inspector Pro or you know, FM Perception or the you know, Nick Oya's tool, and to troubleshoot it. And then it's lifecycle management. Let's face it, building it for a successful app is the easy part. After you build it, you're deploying it to actual people that are using it. And if you do a good job, you got a customer for quite a long time, right? And but if you're an SBA, and now you have a bunch of customers, and then maybe your business model was, oh, I'll sell the base one, and then I'll let each individual customer customize it. God help you, right? But we're trying to make it so that you can do that, because let's face it, the strength of FileMaker is in its bespokeness. Is if it does the same thing for everyone, then you might as well have done compiled software, right? But it's like, I need to do something unique just to my business. It lends itself to that, but we don't offer you the tools to be able to very easily manage that headache, right? And then on top of that, we realize that people are providing hosting services. We're perfectly fine with that. We don't think that FileMaker Cloud should be the only way you do that. And the thing I like about that is not only you can, with our Ubuntu server, that you can do some hosting services to your end users, but as partners or hosting providers, you can add a value add that we can't add at FileMaker Cloud, because you already know how to optimize or advise that customer, or have them pay you to optimize for a WAN environment. So it's a good business model, even if it's a loss leader, right? So those whole areas are ripe for what application lifecycle management gives you, that allows you the tools to do that. And so I've been spearheading that. And it will continue to, like Connect, we'll continue to reinvest in FileMaker Cloud. One of the things we're looking at right now, one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that some people can't use cloud is we don't support plugins, right? But getting plugins the way that they're done right now through C++ and the plugin SDK through Apple approval is no mean feat. But we believe that what we will end up doing is essentially enabling a plugin equivalent using something like microservices that goes off and calls something that you're running on your end that would be similar to your plugin and then just and leverages the result. So we're working with Clay on that, but we believe that's one of the things, not all of it. You know, some of it is the perceived cost because people see it so much more expensive than buying on-prem. Well, the reason is because you're buying a cloud service and you don't have to worry about the server and stuff. But that's just one of the examples of things we're going to do to enhance there. The next area is what's titled third parties, marketplace, and discovery. And this takes the FileMaker and the Claris platform ecosystem to the next level that would enable developers who have resources, essentially developers who are looking for resources, let's put it that way. So you don't have to start from scratch, right? If there's something already out there, if there's something on the marketplace, if there's a template or something that you should be able to get it through the marketplace. But it's actually a little bit broader than that. Under platform extensibility by third parties, this is where coming back after and making add-ons more robust, more powerful, more flexible, and easy to manage for both the person that's creating it and the person that's using it. The ability, as you know, we just recently updated enabled you to build custom connectors with Claris Connect using the interface in Connect and JSON. And then, of course, the marketplace for the products that you have that are either free or for sale. And then we'll go back after the marketplace so people can download things for free to try, but also they can download things that are paid. And even trying to figure out, can we offer you a commerce engine so that they can get it directly through the marketplace and you get paid so that you don't have to have a separate system. So we're looking at that. All of this is on our roadmap for the next year. Now, one of the things I'm going to say about this, and this is exactly the same thing I always would say when I got on stage at DevCon for a keynote address, and I'd say, what you're about to see is not necessarily in the next release. I can't guarantee you the 100% accuracy that'll be there. All I can tell you is we are working on it right now and we intend it to be there, but do not make business decisions based on solely me saying it will be there, right? So that caveat is exactly the same ever. And when I give that caveat, it then allows me to talk to you in ways that other people aren't comfortable because they don't know where the line is. I know where the lines are, right? I've been here long enough. I know where the lines are. I know what to say and what not to say. But I also need to allow you to understand where we're going because your entire livelihoods or for a big chunk of your livelihoods are based on where we're heading, and you have to have confidence in that. And let's face it, over the last couple of years, we really eroded the confidence that our developer class has in us, and we're trying to repair that now. We made some missed moves. We had a massive change in what was a stable organizational structure with the departure of Dominique and people that you knew had through the years. So there's been a lot of change. We weren't communicating with you as much as we should have been. And then nature abhors a vacuum. When there's not information, you're not going to stop talking. You're just going to fill in the blanks with with these things. So we're aware of that. It was all self-inflicted. But I'll tell you, I'm still here. I'm the same person. I'm still looking after FileMaker, and FileMaker is still the linchpin of the Claris platform. It is the vast majority. In fact, it's like 99% of every penny we make. It is the platform, but we're extending it out into different things. I love the fact that we're exploring things like Mongo and all that, but FileMaker ain't going away. And hopefully it's obvious by the things that we're doing. Last part I'll talk about is under analytics in addressing critical data gathering in two fronts. We don't have a lot of intel ourselves about, besides at very gross level, about what kinds of features, what features people are using, like how many people are using ESS, or which one, or how many people are leveraging AI and I'm not talking about, I know that Dave Knight is using it as much as in bulk, right? We don't try to go and figure out what an individual is doing. You know, what is the average number of records in a file, and, you know, all of those kinds of things for us to be able to understand more. But also we're looking at the ability to allow you to also have analytics from your solution richer than what you can get already through server and the different logs and that sort of thing. So that's something also that we're exploring on both sides. So there are far more things than that. They're out a little bit further, but means they're a little bit less certain. I got most of the major categories, not all of them. And I just looked at, okay, what are we aspiring to in the next fiscal year? What I mean by that is we're in our fourth quarter right now. Our fiscal year for 2024 is going to end September 30th. And then we go into our next fiscal year that runs October 1st until the following September 30th. So when I say roadmap the next year, it's that timeline. And the reason that is every year we have to go to Apple and give them a business plan and say, this is what we're going to do. This is how much we think we're going to make. And as long as we get close to that, Apple allows us to do what we need to do, and Luca is happy, and Brad is happy, and so every year we have to do that, and so it nicely lends itself to those sort of cadences. So when I'm talking about the 3-year roadmap, the part that I've just been talking about without slides is really all the stuff besides the Copilot. It's a little bit further out, but it could come in faster because of AI, you know, eats AI, right? It uses itself to do more faster than any of us think. So right now it's out, but it can come sooner rather than later. And certainly if you're paying attention to the kinds of things Chris Ippolite is doing, I've been talking to Chris for well over a year on this sort of nirvana of, why can't I just tell it what I want? You know, the whole Kramer, why don't you just tell me the movie you want?
My clients call that the telepathy plugin.
Yeah, it's unfortunately it hallucinates. But it's just like a human. It's not a hallucination. It's like, I don't know. I might not tell you I don't know. I just might fill in the gaps and you'll think I knew what I'm talking about and I was blowing smoke. All right, questions, comments. That's it for me as far as the content.
Yeah, we're running long, but we can stay as long as you're willing to stay with us and answer questions. So anyone, questions, comments? Okay, I had one. I had this like flash of actual neuronal activity. So what if we could use the intersection of AI and our importing process so that you could match external data to fields based on similarity of data in each field? Is that like way out there, a little ways out there? What can we do? Is there any way to affect things inside FileMaker with AI?
I do not think it's way out there. I think it's within the realm of doability sooner rather than later. And I think that's a very interesting idea because it solves a very specific problem that people deal with. I had not heard that before. Yeah, but I think that's a great place to apply that kind of, because you know, large language model, semantic model is just one of the ways that we can leverage AI, right? Yeah, you know, Steve Marchek used to be our chief technology officer, and before he left, one of the things he was working on, which was like, you know, I always thought that if you look at the scripts, the vast majority of scripts in FileMaker, besides the logic ones and the loops and ifs and else, are about what I could do with a cursor and a mouse, right? And it's navigation, and so it's like, you know, automation. And shouldn't I be able to turn on something and be doing something and it says, hey, you know how you'd like do 10 finds and then it says, do you realize you're in find mode, not entering records? Because people thought, oh, where all my data went? You weren't in browse mode, you were in find mode. Comes up and says, I noticed that you've been doing this over and over again manually. Would you like me to automate this for you? I mean, come on, we almost do
Don't
that as a,
reinvent Clippy, okay?
no, but it's like this. You know that when you do a sort or a find, and then you go to write a script, the sort and find, we actually remember the last thing you did, so you don't have to put it back
Right.
in. It's sort of
Yeah.
similar, right? And it's not so much for you guys as much for someone who, because I remember sitting in the back of Soliant training. I used to sit in intro to FileMaker trainings in the back of the room, ask for permission, so I could see people learning our product. There was a gal who had been using FileMaker for 10 years as a school administrator, and she had brought with her someone that just started to work with her for the last year or so. So 10 years she's been using. She's an intro to FileMaker class, and she says, I know about scripts. I know I should use scripts. I know that they would make me more efficient, but I don't have time to do it. And it's like, oh my God, the very reason for them to be there is so that you do have time. And it's like, for that person, can I just tell them, you want me to put a button there? Because you're just doing this over and over again, right? And that's super low hanging fruit, right? That's just a parlor trick. So I think we have vision that we'll leverage AI. And then on top of that, Apple Intelligence, we're still trying to figure out, okay, what is this all going to look like? How do we work with them, as this thing evolves?
Hey, Lynn,
Hey, Beth.
tell Ronnie Rios your idea and watch his eyes sparkle. That these are the kinds of things that he wants to know, because what are your ideas, and who cares whether you think it's outlandish? Tell him.
Yeah.
Please tell him.
Yep.
Oh, I will do that.
Thank you.
Because we've been begging for a refresh of that import, the dialogue and everything else for decades. So it would be wonderful to have AI folded into the whole thing. Anyone else?
Dave.
Hey, Rick. Great job today. One of the conversations that I talked to numerous Claris people over the last handful of years, and your point about Claris Connect, obviously it was brought in as this piece of software. We had all these high aspirations for it. And my question is, does it serve better as, well, this is an enhancement to the Claris platform. It's really intended to be used with Claris only, as an extender to what your development chores and interactions. And, over the years, there's been sort of, oh, you can use it with Salesforce to talk to QuickBooks, and you can use it with Monday.com to talk with DocuSign. It's an alternative to a Zapier, if this, then that kind of product. My question is, and I also know that when it was brought in, it got hijacked kind of early on to kind of help with the Apple education stuff. And it really kind of got a lot of attention on that to keep Mama Bear happy and so forth. My question is, do you guys really have a feel for, no, this is an element that can be, targeted for people in other platforms because of the elegance, and we've caught up with some of our connectors and so forth, or no, it's really intended to be rolled into the shell of just our own internal platform as a competitive, distinguisher or something of that nature?
Yeah, it's a good question, Dave. And part of me looks at it and go, well, Zapier's got a hell of a head start, right?
Yeah.
So do I really want to? I mean, they got, I don't know how many, it was 1,000 last time I looked, but it was a heck of a lot more than that now. They have a different model where they have a bunch of people creating these things. If this, then that is more simplistic, but easier to use. I think first and foremost, I'd like it to see it be a workhorse for the Claris platform. It has a utility in Studio for sure, and it has a utility in FileMaker. If another business could come out of that, I would just want it to sort of compel itself. It would need a lot of resources in order to make it competitive in and of itself. But I believe it also could be flexible enough to be leveraged. So then we could figure out in the future, would someone want to just tap into that part of the platform? Our vision sort of is, when you buy our platform, you get everything. We don't want to sort of, mix and match it and piecemeal it together. But if we can grow our business in a way that makes sense, then grows all your businesses, then we're not shy about it. But I would rather. Yeah.
It strikes me, if there's an element to third-party leveraging of this as a utility for which is, I think, what the original intent was. But if it's only generally going to be part of the FileMaker universe, the Claris platform and so forth, why does it need its own name? We don't, we can sit there and say, well, we have this thing that's called ScriptMaker and it's baked right in, the script workspace. We have all these different things. They're really kind of named elements that are inside the FileMaker platform, but we don't call those out and call them by name and make those entities. So to me, it's a lot of noise to the platform. If you go, this should either just be FileMaker and it's baked in and it's a wonderful feature set that none of our competitors have, or it should stand on its own 2 feet along with being plug and play with the FileMaker universe.
Yeah, I think it's very confusing to have it as a separate thing to sell. On top of that, now I've got I've got that cloud-based Connect with its own console, and I have cloud-based Studio with its own console, and if I have FileMaker Cloud has its console, and on my on-prem service as a console, now I got freaking 4 consoles, right? It's like, it's a platform, really? I think Connect should completely disappear as a separate thing. It's just the functionality that's shared between Studio and FileMaker, and it's the same thing. Because remember, the thing about right now with Studio and FileMaker is you got scripts that are FileMaker scripts, and you got new scripts that are Studio. It's like, okay, really? Okay, why? But second to that, shouldn't even have to script with Studio, right? That just have AI, just tell it what you want it to do, and who cares about the syntax, right? But we are paying attention to, if you're going to graft Studio into your existing FileMaker solution, there is a massive expectation of a certain base level of functionality and control that you are already used to, that you are not going to give up. And thankfully right now, Robert Holsey is spending 100% of his time focusing on that. I'm thrilled that he's doing it because, as you all know, he's the guy who, after me, took FileMaker and kept advancing it in a number of the areas. And so he knows it like the back of his hand. But, we're trying to make it so that if you need something like Studio, you can use it, you can have the same kind of control, you've got the backups, you have access control, you don't have the tyranny of Claris ID maybe not working, all of that cumbersomeness, because you guys can't use it until then. You might want to kick the tires and play with it, but you really can't use it except in really limited use cases that, frankly, you already have other ways of solving through custom web publishing or better forms or whatever. So it's got to be more than that.
Great. Joshua Halpern had a question. Would you like to weigh in, Josh?
Sure. Thanks for all this amazing information, by the way. This is really promising direction. You mentioned kind of co-pilots as part of the AI landscape earlier. I was kind of just wondering your thoughts, maybe kind of if you have any just, non-committal, but like musings about what that might look like in the platform. Like when I use co-pilots in other languages, like I'm in a different editor entirely, like a Visual Studio Code or something, and it's auto-completing code for me as I go. Is there any thought that something like that might come into the FileMaker GUI itself, in the ScriptMaker or in the custom dialogues, or is the FileMaker scripting language going to make a leap into external editors as an alternative, or just kind of curious?
No, good question. And I don't know all the answers to that, although I see it lending itself very, very well to copilots for when you're writing calculations, copilots when you're writing scripts. It's interesting to think about how we could leverage it for the relationship graph and what we might be able to do there. As assistants, one of the things we've already been fooling around with is we have a knowledge base, we have help, and then what we have missing is, I liken it to where my spider sense is when I watch when someone asks a question on the community and someone answers it, and then realizing that that is an answer. It may not be the best answer. But FileMaker is like, maybe there's 10 ways to do something right, but there's probably 99 ways of doing it wrong, right? So all of you have over time came up with, sort of the best practice, but they're not all the same, right? So we've got to take the best and know how to ferret that out. So I've been working with Chris on ways of doing that, because, well, I actually ran an experiment once where I took ChatGPT pulled a question that was being asked on the community, asked GPT, threw it back to the community to see if anyone noticed, and they did, or to see if anyone corrected it. Right now, the thing about hallucinations is, if its job is to find the best answer, and the only thing it knows about the best answer is the closest thing that has affinity to what was being asked, that may not even be it at all. In fact, I've seen it create things there that doesn't even exist. There are no calcs or scripts to pull that off, but it told you anyway, right? Those are dangerous, especially if you don't know, right? And that's what we're trying. The other thing I didn't say about, and you guys may know this, that we also are supporting local models, so that you don't have to send your data out to the internet. You don't always have to do that. You can sometimes just train it, get the model back, and then put that in a container field. But that you're in complete control. You can be in a closed system. You can run it on your own server. We recommend that you put it on a different piece of hardware than what you're running your server on, because it can be intense. But there's a number of free models out there. I think Hugging Face. There's a lot of them out there. I contend less than a year from now, probably because it's AI, 6 months, what I normally would say a year. The kinds of things that you guys are going to be doing with AI are going to blow our socks off. I mean, I always enjoyed so much going to an Engage or DevCon, setting in sessions that you guys were presenting as experts on a feature that I put in the product, and see what you were doing with it that we never even consider, and completely be blown away. So inspiring, because we're just giving you tools. I have no idea what you're going to build with the tools I give you. And it's not about the hammer. It's what you're doing with that hammer that's interesting to me, right? So I always get so inspired. That's why a lot of times you guys are presenting, you'll see me up in the front row or towards the front row. That's where I want to be. I don't want to be in these special meetings, because I could do that any time of the year. I want to see you talking about what we put in your hands, so that I can take that back and say, how can we give you more?
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Very exciting. Anyone else?
You can
Comments,
tell I lost my
questions?
passion for FileMaker after 24 years.
Yeah. You're just putting in the time, aren't you, Rick?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say this, Lynn. It came up the other day. I swear, I don't know what those 4 Wang engineers did that ended up creating Nutshell, but somehow they put a soul in this thing that still to this day exists. And we're incredibly lucky to have received that from them. And the very fact that to this day, I can make that statement. And when I first started, I found a copy of Nutshell that was sitting on an engineering server. I found a DOS emulator, right? Because it was DOS only. I got it to run. I couldn't get it to save anything, but I got it to run. I looked at it and go, oh my God, I can see the skeleton of FileMaker all these years later. It was there. These guys were brilliant or lucky or both. But there's a soul in this product that we can't actually get to. There's the sum of it is greater than the pieces of its part. And that's why after all these years, while it's just a job, it's also a passion. And I'll tell you, there's never enjoying myself more than I'm doing stuff like this. That I can talk without scripted, without marketing language, just conveying my passion and what I know, because you aren't inside, and I can tell you, I know what I can tell you and what I can't tell you, and I can tell you more than anybody else, because I got 24 years of knowing where the line is. I was trained from very good people that tell me where the line is, because we are Apple as well. There are lines. There are certain things I cannot say. I cannot speak on behalf of Apple. I can't tell you stuff that Apple's doing that they haven't announced. And I would never do that. And if I did do that, I would expect to be fired. But I know where the lines are, which allows me to talk to you candidly.
Well, we really appreciate your being here, sharing your under the kimono items.
Don't tell
and
HR.
Spending your time with it. It is being recorded, Rick.
HR won't watch it.
Thank you very much
All
for
right.
everything. And we'll have you back soon.
All right,
as
great.
things
Thanks for having me.
develop. And thank you everyone for being here. Our next meeting will be second Friday in August. So join us then. I'm going to stop the recording.
Great job.